Welcome to Snooze and Stories. Tonight, we journey back more than 2,000 years to ancient Athens to walk alongside one of history's most remarkable minds. A man whose questions still resonate across ages, who chose wisdom over comfort and truth over safety. His name was Socrates. If you enjoy these historical stories, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support means everything. And if you have suggestions for other historical figures, leave a comment below. Now, let us close our eyes and drift back through the centuries. Feel yourself becoming lighter, the modern world fading away. We're traveling now, past the noise of today, through generations of voices, past empires rising and falling, until we arrive in a place where the Mediterranean sun shines warm on white marble, where olive groves rustle in gentle breezes, and where, in the heart of a great city, people gather to talk, to debate, to wonder about life's deepest questions. This is Athens, in the 5th century before Christ, the golden age of Greece. And here, in these narrow streets, beneath the shadow of the great Acropolis, our story begins. Let yourself sink deeper into comfort now. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Just listen and let the ancient world wrap around you like a warm blanket. Imagine Athens on an early morning. The sun rises slowly over Mount Hymettus, casting golden light across the city. The air is cool, fragrant with the scent of wild thyme from the hillsides, mixed with wood smoke from breakfast fires beginning to burn in homes throughout the city. Athens is alive, but in a different way than cities today. There are no cars, no mechanical sounds, only the gentle padding of sandaled feet on stone, the bleating of goats being led to market, the distant call of a rooster, the murmur of voices beginning their day. The streets are narrow, winding between houses made of mud brick and stone. Some are whitewashed, gleaming in the morning light. Others show their age, weathered by countless seasons. Wooden shutters open slowly as people wake, faces appearing, looking out at the new day. Let's walk through these streets together, slowly. There's no hurry. We pass a workshop where a potter is already at his wheel, his hands moving in endless circles, shaping wet clay with practiced ease. The wheel creaks rhythmically, a soothing sound, hypnotic in its repetition. He doesn't look up, lost in his work, lost in the meditation of creation. Further on, a woman sweeps her doorstep, her movements slow and methodical. She hums softly to herself, a melody lost to time. Her house is modest, but clean, with a small courtyard where herbs grow in clay pots. The streets begin to fill as we walk, people heading to the Agora, the great marketplace and gathering place of Athens. We follow them, moving with the gentle flow of the crowd. No pushing, no rushing, just a slow migration toward the heart of the city. The Agora opens before us like a revelation. It's a vast open space, surrounded by colonnades and stoas, long covered walkways with columns that cast pleasant shadows.
Here, merchants have set up their stalls. There are olives glistening in large clay jars, their dark purple and green colors rich in the sunlight. Amphorae filled with wine and oil stand in careful rows. Fresh fish from Piraeus lie on marble slabs, their scales catching the light like tiny mirrors. The sounds here are beautiful in their simplicity. The murmur of haggling, prices discussed in reasonable tones, the occasional laugh, the clink of coins, the rustle of fabric as a woman examines a new hamiton, a cloak, running the wool between her fingers to test its quality. Above it all rises the Acropolis, the great hill dominating Athens, crowned with temples. The Parthenon stands magnificent, its columns perfect, its marble glowing warm in the sunlight. It's still relatively new in this time, less than 50 years old, its colors bright, reds and blues and golds, painting the sculptures and friezes, not the stark white we imagine today, but vibrant, alive. This is a city of contradictions, of beauty and brutality, of democracy and slavery, of high philosophy and everyday struggles. It's a city where farmers and aristocrats might stand side by side at the assembly, where a slave might be more educated than a free man, where women run households but cannot vote, where foreigners bring exotic goods and ideas but never become citizens. The air smells of many things: olive oil and fish, baking bread and incense from the temples, sweat and perfume, dust and sea salt carried on the breeze from the harbor at Piraeus. Listen to the languages mixing in the air. Greek, of course, but also Egyptian, Persian, Phoenician. The accents of the Mediterranean world blending in this crossroads of civilization.
Athens is powerful now, wealthy from its silver mines and its empire, the leader of the Delian League, a naval power that dominates the Aegean Sea. But it's also a city on edge, locked in a long and terrible war with Sparta, a war that will drain its strength and test its soul. The citizens take pride in their democracy, their ability to gather in the assembly and vote, to hold their leaders accountable, to participate in trials by jury. They see themselves as different from other Greeks, more enlightened, more free. And yet, beneath this pride, there are tensions. The democracy is less than 200 years old, still experimental, still fragile. Traditional aristocrats resent the power of common people. The poor envy the wealthy. Different factions compete for influence. Old religious beliefs mix uneasily with new philosophical ideas. As evening approaches, the agora takes on a different character. The merchants begin to pack their goods. The crowd thins. But small groups remain, gathering under the colonnades, sitting on stone benches, standing in circles, talking. They talk about everything, about politics and war, about the gods and fate, about justice and virtue, about what makes a good life, what makes a good person. And it's here, in these conversations, in this atmosphere of inquiry and debate, that we must look for Socrates. Not in the temples, not in the grand buildings, but here, among the people, asking his questions, seeking his truth. The sun sits slowly over Athens, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. the marble columns glowing like they're lit from within. The city grows quieter. Lamps are lit, small points of warm light appearing in windows and doorways. Somewhere in this city, in this moment of history, a baby is about to be born. A baby who will grow to challenge everything Athens believes, who will die for his principles, and who will never be forgotten. Let us find him now. Let us go back to the beginning, to a modest house in a district called Alopike, where a woman is in labor, and where the future of philosophy is about to arrive.
The year is 469 before Christ, or perhaps 470. The ancient sources disagree, but spring has come to Athens, bringing with it new life. In a small house in Alopeke, a district just outside the city walls, a woman named Phainarete labors to bring her child into the world. She's a midwife by profession, skilled in helping others through this passage, and now she experiences it herself. Her husband, Sophroniskos, waits outside, as fathers do. He's a stoneworker, a sculptor, perhaps, or a mason. His hands strong from years of working marble and limestone. He's not wealthy, but respectable, a citizen of Athens with the right to vote, to participate in the democracy. Finally, the cry of a newborn breaks the silence. A son, healthy and strong-voiced. They will name him Socrates. Let's stay with this child for a moment. This baby who knows nothing yet of philosophy or questions or the fate that awaits him. He's just a small, warm bundle, crying for milk, seeking comfort, completely dependent and completely innocent. His early years pass as they do for most children. The house in Alopeke is modest but sufficient. 1 or 2 rooms, packed earth floors, simple furniture, an altar where the family makes offerings to the household gods. Outside there's a small courtyard, maybe a few chickens scratching in the dirt, an olive tree providing shade. Young Socrates learns to walk, stumbling on unsteady legs, exploring his small world with curious hands and eyes. He learns to talk, first single words, then phrases, then endless questions as all children ask. Why is the sky blue? Where does the sun go at night? Why must I sleep? His mother teaches him as she goes about her work. She's often called away to help with births, disappearing into the night when her services are needed, returning tired but satisfied when a new life has been safely delivered. Sometimes she takes young Socrates with her, letting him see the mystery of birth, though of course he doesn't understand yet what it means.
His father teaches him too, in a different way. Sometimes Socrates accompanies Sophroniskos to work, watching him chip away at stone, seeing how careful strikes of hammer on chisel can reveal forms hidden in the rock. His father works slowly, precisely, never rushing, letting the stone tell him where it wants to break. You can't force the stone, his father tells him. You have to understand it, work with its grain, find what's already there inside it. These words, though Socrates doesn't know it yet, will echo through his later philosophy. The idea that truth is already inside people, waiting to be revealed through the right questions, much like his father reveals forms hidden in stone. Alopike is a peaceful place, a rural district with farms and olive groves, goats grazing on rocky hillsides. The pace of life is slow here, governed by seasons, by the growing of crops, the harvesting of olives, the turning of the year. But Athens is close, just a short walk, and even as a boy, Socrates is drawn there. The city fascinates him, the crowds and noise and energy, so different from quiet Alopike. At 7 years old, as is customary for boys of citizen families, Socrates begins his formal education. His father hires a grammatistes, a teacher who will instruct him in reading and writing. In a small room, sitting on a wooden bench, Socrates learns his letters. The Greek alphabet, alpha, beta, gamma, scratched into wax tablets with a stylus. He learns Homer, the Iliad and Odyssey, memorizing long passages as all Greek boys must. The tales of Achilles and Odysseus, of gods and heroes, of glory and fate. He recites them over and over until they're part of him, until the rhythms of Homer's verse flow naturally from his tongue. He studies music, too, learning to play the lyre, understanding the mathematical relationships between notes, the harmony and proportion that the Greeks believe underlie all reality.
And he trains his body, for the Greeks believe in balance, in educating both mind and body. He wrestles with other boys, runs and jumps, learns the skills of a warrior, for every citizen must be ready to defend Athens. But even as a boy, there's something different about Socrates. He asks too many questions. When his teacher explains something, Socrates doesn't just accept it. He wants to know why. Why does Homer say the gods behave this way? How do we know what honor means? What makes an action just or unjust? His teachers find him frustrating sometimes, this boy who won't simply learn what he's told, who always wants to dig deeper, to understand not just what things are, but why they are. The other children find him strange too. He's not interested in the games they play, not concerned with winning or being popular. He'd rather sit and think, or follow an interesting question wherever it leads, even if it makes him late for dinner. His appearance is unremarkable, actually rather homely by Greek standards. He has a snub nose, bulging eyes, a thick neck, a body that's strong but not beautiful. The Greeks value physical beauty highly, seeing it as a reflection of inner virtue, but Socrates will never be beautiful, not in the way they mean. The seasons turn, one following another in their eternal rhythm. Spring comes with its flowers and new lambs. Summer brings heat and the harvesting of grain. Autumn means olive harvest, families gathering in groves to beat the trees and collect the precious fruit. Winter brings rain and cold, time for staying indoors, for telling stories by the fire. Through all this, Socrates grows, from boy to youth to young man. His body becomes stronger, his voice deeper, but his questions never stop. He watches the world around him with intense curiosity. He sees how people behave, how they treat each other, how they justify their actions. He notices contradictions, the gap between what people say and what they do, between what they claim to value and how they actually live.
When he's old enough, around 14 or 15, his formal education ends, as it does for most boys. Now it's time to learn a trade. His father takes him on as an apprentice in the stoneworking workshop. The work is hard, physically demanding. Socrates learns to choose the right chisel for each type of stone, how to read the grain, how to strike with just the right force. He works marble and limestone, creating everyday objects and perhaps some sculptures too. The workshop is dusty, filled with the sound of hammering, the smell of stone dust. Other workers come and go, some singing as they work, others silent, lost in concentration. There's a rhythm to the work, a meditation in the repetition. Socrates is good at it. His hands are strong and sure, but his mind is elsewhere. Even as he works, he's thinking, questioning, wondering. He's not content with just knowing how to work stone. He wants to know what beauty is. What makes one form more pleasing than another? Is beauty objective or subjective? Does it exist independently or only in our perception? These questions have no easy answers, and his fellow workers don't care about them anyway. They want to finish their work, get paid, go home to their families. But Socrates can't let the questions go.
The years of youth pass like water flowing. Athens continues its life around him, its democracy functioning, its empire expanding, its culture flourishing. Playwrights like Sophocles write their tragedies. Sculptors like Phidias create masterpieces. The Parthenon grows on the Acropolis, becoming more magnificent with each passing year. But storm clouds are gathering. Athens and Sparta, the two great powers of Greece, eye each other with increasing suspicion. Alliances shift, tensions mount, war is coming. A war that will consume a generation, that will test everything Athens believes about itself.
And Socrates, now a young man of 20 or so, strong in body, if not beautiful, trained in a trade but hungry for something more, will be swept up in it. The quiet life of a stoneworker is not to be his fate. History has other plans. But before we follow him to war, let us pause here, in this moment of transition, when he stands between youth and manhood, between the simple answers of childhood and the complex questions of philosophy. Let us breathe with him, feel the weight of the chisel in his hand, the dust in his throat, the questions burning in his mind. The sun is setting again over Athens, casting long shadows across the workshops and houses, and somewhere in those shadows, Socrates stands, looking toward a future he cannot see, but which we now know will change the world forever.
The workshop is the same as always. Dust motes drifting in shafts of sunlight, the steady tap-tap-tap of hammers on chisels, the scrape of tools on stone. Socrates works steadily, creating a column capital, perhaps, or a decorative relief. His hands know what to do, but his mind wanders. He's in his early 20s now, an age when most young men are thinking about marriage, about establishing themselves in their trade, about building a secure future. But Socrates finds himself increasingly restless. The work that satisfies his hands leaves his mind hungry. Sometimes he leaves the workshop early, when the afternoon heat makes the stone too warm to work comfortably. He walks to the agora, still dusty from his labor, and there he lingers, watching, listening. The agora is full of teachers in those days. They're called sophists, wise men, traveling teachers who offer to instruct young men in rhetoric and virtue, for a fee, of course. They gather small crowds around them, speaking with confidence and flair, promising to teach anyone how to argue effectively, how to succeed in politics, how to win any debate. Socrates watches them with fascination, but also with growing unease.
There's Protagoras, perhaps the most famous, who teaches that man is the measure of all things, that truth is relative, that with the right training, you can argue either side of any question equally well. There's Gorgias, the master of rhetoric, who claims he can make the worse argument appear the better, who treats language like a tool, a weapon, caring more for persuasion than for truth. There's Prodicus, who makes careful distinctions between similar words, and Hippias, who boasts of his many skills and his prodigious memory. They're impressive, these sophists. They speak beautifully, they're educated and worldly, they know poetry and mathematics and astronomy. Young men from wealthy families cluster around them, eager to pay for their wisdom, hoping to gain the skills needed to succeed in democratic Athens. But something bothers Socrates. He notices that the sophists rarely say, "I don't know." They have answers for everything, quick and clever and polished. They speak with absolute confidence about justice and virtue and the good life. But do they really know these things? Or are they just skilled at seeming to know? One afternoon, Socrates gathers his courage and approaches one of these teachers. The details are lost to us. We don't know which sophist or exactly when, but we can imagine the scene. The sophist is mid-lecture, surrounded by admiring students. Socrates, dusty from the workshop, pushes to the front. "Excuse me," he says, "but you claim to teach virtue. May I ask what virtue is?" The sophist is perhaps annoyed at the interruption, but he answers readily enough. Virtue is doing good to friends and harm to enemies, or virtue is obedience to the laws, or virtue is knowledge. The answer varies depending on which source we read.
"I see," says Socrates. But then, and he asks another question, and another. Each question seems simple, but each reveals a contradiction, an assumption that doesn't quite hold, a complexity that the easy answer ignored. The crowd grows quiet. The sophist becomes flustered. He tries to maintain his composure, but Socrates won't let go. Not rudely, not aggressively, just persistently, like water wearing away stone. Finally, the sophist admits, perhaps reluctantly, that he doesn't actually know what virtue is. Not really. Not in any way he can clearly explain and defend. The students murmur among themselves. Some are impressed by Socrates, others are angry, thinking he's disrupted their lesson, wasted their time and money. But Socrates walks away thoughtful. He's discovered something important. These supposedly wise men, these teachers who charge money for their wisdom, don't actually know what they're talking about. Not deeply. They know facts and techniques, they know how to speak well, but they don't know the essential things, the things that really matter. And if they don't know, then who does? He begins to haunt the agora more regularly, engaging anyone who claims knowledge in conversation. Politicians who speak confidently about justice, poets who write about virtue, craftsmen who understand their trades, religious leaders who interpret the will of the gods. He talks to them all, always polite, always respectful, but always probing, always questioning. And what he discovers troubles him deeply. The politicians don't really understand justice. They just pursue power. The poets don't really understand virtue. They're inspired but can't explain what their inspiration means. The craftsmen understand their specific skills but can't articulate the larger principles behind them. The priests repeat traditions but can't justify why these traditions should be followed.
Everyone claims to know things they don't actually know. Everyone mistakes familiarity for understanding, confidence for wisdom. But Socrates himself is no better. He admits this freely. He doesn't know what justice is, or virtue, or courage, or piety. He can't define these things any more clearly than anyone else can. The difference is, he knows he doesn't know. He's aware of his ignorance. And somehow, this awareness seems important. Seems like the beginning of real wisdom rather than false certainty. His family doesn't understand this new obsession. His father wants him to focus on his work, to build his business, to act like a normal young man. His mother worries about his future, about his lack of interest in practical matters. But Socrates can't stop. The questions have hold of him now. Or perhaps he's always been asking them, but now he's found a way to pursue them seriously, systematically. He starts spending more time in the agora and less in the workshop. He talks to anyone who will listen, or rather, who will engage with his questions. He's not trying to show off, not trying to humiliate anyone. He genuinely wants to understand. What is justice? What is courage? What makes a life worth living? How should we live? What do we really know? How do we know it? These questions become his life, his obsession, his calling. The other young men his age are moving forward with their lives. They're marrying, starting families, establishing themselves in business or politics. But Socrates is going deeper, tunneling down beneath the surface of conventional wisdom, looking for foundations, for bedrock truth. People begin to know him around Athens. That strange man who asks questions. That poor stone worker who thinks he's a philosopher. That fellow who makes people look foolish with his endless questioning.
Some find him annoying. Some find him dangerous. Some find him fascinating. But nobody can quite ignore him. And then, just as his philosophical mission is beginning to take shape, just as he's finding his path, the world intrudes in the most brutal way possible. War breaks out between Athens and Sparta. The Peloponnesian War, a conflict that will last for decades, that will consume enormous resources, that will kill thousands, that will test the very soul of Athens. And like every able-bodied citizen, Socrates must serve. The philosopher must become a soldier. The man who seeks wisdom must learn to kill. The transition is abrupt, jarring. One day he's in the agora debating the nature of justice. The next he's strapping on bronze armor, learning to move in formation, preparing to march off to war. The setting sun casts long shadows across Athens. Tomorrow, at dawn, Socrates will leave with his unit. He's around 30 years old. No longer young, but not yet old. Standing at a threshold between two worlds. Tonight he walks through the city one last time, breathing in the familiar smells, listening to the familiar sounds. The stone benches where he's had so many conversations, the colonnades where he's walked and thought, the workshops and markets he knows so well. All of it will be waiting when he returns, if he returns. For now, the questions must wait. Philosophy must yield to necessity. Tomorrow, the soldier's life begins. The march is long and dusty. Hundreds of men moving in loose formation, their armor clanking softly, their sandaled feet raising small clouds of dust with each step. Socrates marches with them, a hoplite, a heavy infantryman carrying his shield and spear, wearing the bronze breastplate and helmet that mark him as a citizen soldier of Athens. The sun beats down mercilessly. Sweat runs beneath the bronze, chafing skin, making the armor feel like an oven. But they march on, stopping occasionally to drink from streams or rest in whatever shade they can find. At night, they make camp. Fires are lit, simple meals of bread and cheese, maybe some dried fish or olives, are eaten in small groups. Men talk quietly, some joking to hide their fear, others silent, thinking of homes and families left behind. Some sleep easily, exhausted from the march. Others lie awake, listening to the sounds of the night,
wondering what tomorrow will bring. Socrates adapts to military life in his own way. Physically, he proves surprisingly resilient. His body, trained by years of stonework, is strong, and he seems to have an almost superhuman ability to endure discomfort. While other soldiers complained about the heat or cold, about hunger or thirst, Socrates accepts it all with equanimity. There are stories about his endurance, perhaps exaggerated, but repeated often enough to suggest some truth. How he could march barefoot in winter when other men had wrapped their feet in rags. How he could stand guard all night in freezing rain without complaint. How he needed less food and sleep than other men, as if physical needs affected him less than they affected normal people. But it's not that he's indifferent to discomfort. Rather, he seems to have trained himself to accept it, to not let it disturb his inner calm. His body might suffer, but his mind remains clear, focused, undisturbed. The campaign drags on. They fight at Potidaea, a city far to the north. The siege lasts for years. Not constant battle, but long stretches of waiting, of boredom and discomfort, punctuated by moments of terror and violence. In battle, Socrates proves himself brave,
Not recklessly so, not seeking glory, but steady and reliable. When his unit is under attack, he holds his position. When retreat is necessary, he's one of the last to leave, helping protect the withdrawal of others. There's a story that he once saved the life of young Alcibiades, a wealthy aristocrat who will become important later in Socrates' story, carrying him to safety when he was wounded and surrounded. But between the battles, during the long months of waiting, Socrates is himself. While other soldiers gamble or drink or talk of home, he thinks. Sometimes he falls into deep contemplation, standing still for hours, oblivious to everything around him. His fellow soldiers learn to work around him during these episodes, to leave him be, knowing he'll return to himself eventually. Once, the story goes, he stood thinking for an entire day and night, from sunrise to sunrise, unmoving, until finally he offered a prayer to the sun and walked away, as if nothing unusual had happened. What was he thinking about during these long trances? We can only guess. Perhaps the same questions that occupied him in Athens. Perhaps the strange contradiction of being a philosopher forced to be a warrior. Perhaps the nature of courage, which he was now experiencing firsthand. Perhaps the nature of death, which surrounded him constantly in the war. The years pass slowly. More campaigns, more marches, more battles. They fight at Delion, where the Athenians are defeated and must retreat. Again, Socrates distinguishes himself, not panicking, maintaining discipline, helping ensure the retreat doesn't become a rout. Years later, they fight at Amphipolis, another defeat for Athens. Socrates is there too, steady as always, surviving when thousands don't. War changes most men. It hardens some, making them cruel and violent. It breaks others, leaving them haunted and diminished. But Socrates seems unchanged. Or perhaps more accurately, he seems to have found in war a confirmation of his philosophical principles.
He learns that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite fear. He learns that wisdom means understanding the limits of which you know, which in war can mean the difference between life and death. He learns that virtue, real virtue, shows itself in action, in how you behave when everything is chaos and terror. He also learns about death, sees it up close, repeatedly. Men he knows, men he's marched with and eaten with and talked with, suddenly gone. A spear thrust, an arrow, a fever, and a person becomes a corpse. That quick, that final. But death doesn't terrify him the way it does some others.
Perhaps because he's thought about it so much already. Perhaps because his philosophy has prepared him for it. He accepts death as part of life, inevitable, nothing to fear, nothing to rage against. The night fires burn low. In the darkness, men sleep or keep watch. The stars wheel slowly overhead, the same stars that shine over Athens, over Sparta, over all the world. The war that seems so important, so all-consuming, is just a small thing beneath those infinite lights. Socrates sits by the dying fire, his face illuminated by the embers' glow. Perhaps he's thinking about the questions he left behind. Perhaps he's thinking about nothing at all, just resting in the silence, in the peace that he's learned to find even in the midst of war. Eventually, finally, the campaigns end. Not the war itself, that will drag on for many more years. But Socrates' part in it is done. He's served his time, earned honor, proven himself. Now he can return home. The march back to Athens is different from the march out. The men are older, harder, changed. They've seen things they wish they hadn't seen, done things they wish they hadn't done. Many friends who marched out with them aren't marching back. But Athens waits, dusty and loud and familiar. The Agora still bustles with its commerce and conversation. The Acropolis still gleams on its hill. Life has continued in the city while they were away, mostly unchanged, though perhaps a little poorer, a little more worn.
Socrates takes off his armor for the last time, hangs up his shield and spear, and returns to civilian life. He's older now, in his 40s, his face more weathered, his body harder. But the questions haven't changed. If anything, they've become more urgent. He's seen men die. He's faced death himself. He's killed, though he doesn't dwell on it. He's experienced courage and cowardice, honor and shame, clarity and confusion. And through it all, the same questions have followed him, have waited patiently for his return. What is courage? What is justice? How should we live? What matters most? War hasn't answered these questions, but it's made them more pressing, made it impossible to ignore them or dismiss them as mere abstractions. These questions are about real life, about real choices, about how we face the inevitable challenges and sorrows and mysteries of existence. The city sleeps now, quiet in the late hour. Tomorrow Socrates will return to the Agora, will resume his questioning, will continue his philosophical mission. But tonight, let us leave him here, between war and peace, between youth and age, a soldier becoming a philosopher again, gathering his strength for the work ahead. The fire dies to ashes, the stars fade as dawn approaches, and somewhere in Athens, in a small house in Allopec, Socrates sleeps, perhaps dreamlessly, preparing, without knowing it, for the next great turning point in his strange and remarkable life.
Delphi sits high in the mountains. The journey from Athens takes several days, winding up through olive groves and rocky slopes, climbing higher and higher until the air grows thin and cool. The path is well traveled, worn smooth by thousands of pilgrims seeking wisdom from the oracle. As you climb, the world below shrinks away. Cities become small, their concerns becoming distant. Up here, surrounded by peaks and eagles and the vast silence of the mountains, you feel closer to something eternal, something beyond human affairs. The sanctuary of Delphi clings to the mountainside, built on multiple terraces connected by steep paths. Treasury buildings, donated by various city-states, line the sacred way, each trying to outdo the others in magnificence. Marble gleams, bronze statues catch the light. Offerings from centuries of pilgrims crowd every surface. And above it all, the great temple of Apollo. This is the Omphalos, the navel of the world according to Greek belief. This is where Zeus's eagles met when released from opposite ends of the earth. This is where the boundary between mortal and divine grows thin, where the god Apollo speaks through his priestess, the Pythia, answering the questions that bring pilgrims from across the Greek world. Now, let us go back in time to a day when the sun shines warm on Delphi's stones, when crowds of pilgrims fill the sanctuary, and when a man named Chaerephon prepares to ask the oracle a question that will change his friend's life forever. Chaerephon is a devoted friend of Socrates, younger, enthusiastic, perhaps a bit impetuous. He believes deeply in his friend's wisdom, in the importance of his questions, in the unique quality of his mind, and he wants confirmation of what he already believes to be true. So he asks the oracle, "Is anyone wiser than Socrates?" The question hangs in the air. Inside the temple, in the innermost chamber, the Pythia sits on her tripod over the sacred chasm. Perhaps she breathes vapors rising from the earth. Perhaps she chews laurel leaves. Perhaps it's something else entirely. The ancient sources disagree. But somehow, in some way, she enters the trance that allows the god to speak through her. The priests interpret her utterances, translating ecstatic visions into words that questioners can understand. And the answer comes back, clear and unequivocal. No one is wiser than Socrates.
The oracle has spoken. Chaerephon hurries back to Athens, eager to share the news. He finds Socrates in the agora, probably engaged in one of his usual conversations, asking his usual questions. He interrupts excitedly. "Socrates, the oracle at Delphi. She says you're the wisest man in Athens, the wisest anywhere." But Socrates doesn't react as Chaerephon expects. He doesn't smile, or thank him, or accept the praise. Instead, he falls silent. His face shows confusion, even distress. "That can't be right," he finally says. "I'm not wise at all. I don't know anything. Not really. The oracle must mean something else." But Chaerephon is insistent. The oracle has spoken, and oracles don't lie, though they may speak in riddles. The god Apollo, through his priestess, has declared Socrates the wisest of men. Socrates walks away troubled. The agora continues its business around him, merchants haggling, children playing, life flowing on. But Socrates barely notices. His mind is consumed by a puzzle. How can the oracle say he's wise when he knows he isn't? The god cannot lie, but how can this statement be true? For days, weeks perhaps, the question haunts him. He can't let it go. It's not vanity that drives him, not a desire to prove the oracle right. Rather, it's the puzzle itself.
If the god says something that seems false, but gods don't lie, then what does the statement really mean? What truth is hidden in what appears to be an error? Finally, Socrates decides on a course of action. He will test the oracle's statement. He will seek out people who are reputed to be wise, people with knowledge and expertise, and he will examine them. Perhaps he'll find someone wiser than himself, and thus prove the oracle wrong, or at least understand what the oracle really meant. He begins with the politicians.
These are men who lead Athens, who speak in the assembly, who make important decisions about war and peace, who claim to know what's best for the city. Surely they must be wise. They speak with such confidence, command such respect, hold such power. Socrates approaches them, politely, respectfully. He engages them in conversation, and he asks them questions about their work, about justice and governance, about the principles that guide their decisions. At first, the politicians are happy to talk. They enjoy displaying their knowledge, their experience, their wisdom. They speak at length about the complexities of leadership, the challenges of statecraft, the difficult decisions they must make. But then Socrates asks a simple question. Just one question. Perhaps, what is justice? Or, what makes a law good? Or, how do we know what's best for the city? The politician answers, confidently at first, but Socrates asks another question, and another. Gently, persistently, he probes the foundations of their knowledge. He points out contradictions, examines assumptions, follows implications. And slowly, inevitably, it becomes clear that the politician doesn't really know what he's talking about. Not deeply. He knows how to win votes, how to make speeches, how to navigate political conflicts. But the fundamental questions, the principles underlying his actions, these remain unclear, undefined, unexamined. The politician becomes uncomfortable, then defensive, then angry. Who is this poor nobody to question him? What gives this common man the right to challenge someone who has achieved so much? But Socrates is unmoved by the anger. He's not trying to humiliate anyone. He's genuinely seeking to understand. And what he's discovered is important. The people who claim to govern wisely don't actually understand wisdom.
He moves on to the poets. These are the revered artists of Athens, the men who write the great tragedies and comedies that everyone watches, who speak of virtue and vice, who move audiences to tears or laughter. Surely they must be wise. Their works contain such profound insights into human nature, such beautiful expressions of truth. Socrates talks with them, asks them about their work. What did you mean by this line? Why did you have this character act this way? What is the nature of the virtue you're depicting? The poets struggle to answer. They wrote inspired by the muses, they say. The words came to them in a kind of divine madness. They felt what was right, but they can't necessarily explain why. They created beauty, but they can't define what beauty is. It's not that their work is bad, far from it, but the poets themselves don't fully understand their own creations. They're like instruments the gods play, producing beautiful music without comprehending the principles of harmony that make it beautiful. So the poets aren't wise either, not in the way Socrates means wisdom. They have a gift, but not understanding. Next, he turns to the craftsmen. These are people with real skills, practical knowledge. The carpenter knows how to build a chair.
The cobbler knows how to make shoes. The blacksmith knows how to work metal. This is genuine knowledge, not pretense or inspiration, but real understanding of their craft. And Socrates acknowledges this freely. Yes, the craftsmen know something. They understand their specific domain. They can explain their techniques, teach others, justify their methods. But then he notices something troubling. Because they know their craft well, the craftsmen assume they know other things too. The carpenter thinks he understands justice because he understands carpentry. The cobbler thinks he understands virtue because he understands shoemaking. They mistake expertise in one area for wisdom in general. And so even the craftsmen who have real knowledge fall short of wisdom. They know their trade, but they don't know the limits of their knowledge. Socrates tests more people, examines more claims to wisdom. The wealthy, the beautiful, the strong, the clever. He talks with everyone who claims to know something important, who has a reputation for wisdom or expertise or understanding. And everywhere he finds the same thing. People claim to know what they don't know. They're confident in their ignorance. They mistake experience for understanding, familiarity for wisdom, success for knowledge. They live unexamined lives, never questioning their assumptions, never probing the foundations of their beliefs. And then, slowly, like dawn breaking over the mountains, Socrates understands what the oracle meant. He's not wise in the sense of possessing great knowledge. He doesn't understand justice or virtue or beauty any better than anyone else. But he knows that he doesn't know. He's aware of his ignorance. And this awareness, this honest recognition of the limits of his understanding, is itself a kind of wisdom. Everyone else thinks they know things they don't know. They're doubly ignorant, ignorant of the truth and ignorant of their ignorance. But Socrates knows he doesn't know. He's only singly ignorant. And this makes him, in a real sense, wiser than those who claim false knowledge. The oracle was right after all, in a way that's both humbling and profound. Socrates isn't the wisest because he knows more. He's the wisest because he knows less, or rather, because he knows how little he knows. Human wisdom, real wisdom, begins with recognizing how little we understand, how much we assume, how often we're wrong. The realization settles over him like a cloak.
This is his mission then. This is what he's been called to do. Not to teach people what he knows, because he doesn't know anything, but to help people recognize what they don't know, to examine their beliefs, question their assumptions, test their understanding, to be a gadfly, stinging the great horse of Athens into self-awareness. It's a strange calling, an uncomfortable one. It won't make him popular. It won't make him wealthy. It might even be dangerous, because people don't like having their ignorance exposed, don't like having their comfortable certainties questioned. But the god has spoken. Through the oracle at Delphi, Apollo has given Socrates his purpose. And Socrates, despite everything, despite the difficulty and the danger, accepts it. The sun sets over Delphi, casting long shadows across the sanctuary. Pilgrims continue their eternal pilgrimage, climbing the mountain, asking their questions, receiving their answers. The Pythia will speak again tomorrow, and the day after, and for centuries to come. The oracle will outlast empires, will survive wars and disasters, will speak until finally, in a different age, a different world, the old gods fall silent. But for now, the oracle's work with Socrates is done. The answer has been given. The puzzle has been solved. And back in Athens, a man has found his calling. Socrates walks home through the evening streets, his mind clear now, his purpose certain. Tomorrow he'll return to the agora. Tomorrow he'll resume his questioning. But now it's not aimless curiosity. Now it's a mission. Now it's service to the god. The stars emerge one by one, constant and eternal above the changing world below. And somewhere among those stars, perhaps the gods watch, pleased with their philosopher, their gadfly, their question-asker. Sleep comes gently tonight. The sleep of someone who has found their purpose, who knows their path, who accepts their fate.
Morning in the agora. The sun climbs slowly, warming the marble, chasing shadows from beneath the colonnades. Merchants set up their stalls, arranging their goods with practiced ease. The smell of fresh bread drifts from nearby bakeries. People begin to gather, to shop, to talk, to conduct the business of the day. And there, as he is most days now, stands Socrates. He's in his 40s, perhaps early 50s, his body still strong from his years of physical labor and military service, his face weathered but animated. He wears a simple himation, a cloak, often the same one, slightly worn. His feet are usually bare, even in winter. His appearance is unremarkable, even comical, with his snub nose and protruding eyes and thick neck. But when he speaks, people listen. Not because he speaks beautifully, not because he tells them what they want to hear, but because there's something in his voice, in his presence, that compels attention. An intensity, a sincerity, a sense that he cares deeply about the truth, whatever the cost. He's waiting now, watching the crowd, looking for someone to talk with. Not just anyone, but someone who claims to know something, someone confident in their understanding, someone ready to be examined. A young man approaches, wealthy by his clothing, educated by his speech. He's heard of Socrates, heard that this strange philosopher asks interesting questions. He's curious, and perhaps a bit arrogant, certain that his education and intelligence will be more than sufficient for any challenge. "Socrates," he says, "I've heard you discuss virtue often. Tell me, what is virtue? Can you define it for me?"
Socrates smiles, but it's a gentle smile, not mocking. "My friend, I wish I could answer your question, but the truth is, I don't know what virtue is. I've thought about it a great deal, but I can't seem to grasp it clearly. Perhaps you can help me understand. You seem like an intelligent person, educated in all the best things. Surely you know what virtue is." The young man is pleased to be asked. This is his chance to demonstrate his knowledge. "Of course," he says confidently, "virtue is doing good to friends and harm to enemies, as the poets say. Or perhaps virtue is having courage and wisdom and self-control, the qualities that all the wise men praise." "I see," says Socrates, nodding thoughtfully. "Those are interesting answers. But I wonder, could we examine them a bit? You say virtue is doing good to friends and harm to enemies. That seems reasonable at first. But tell me, is it virtuous to harm anyone, even an enemy?" "Well, yes, if they deserve it," the young man replies, though a bit less confidently now. "But what if we make a mistake?" Socrates asks. "What if someone we think is an enemy is actually good, and we harm them?
Would that be virtuous? No, not if they're actually good. So virtue isn't simply harming enemies, but harming bad people who deserve it. Yes, that's more precise. But then, how do we know who deserves harm? Don't we need to understand what makes someone bad? And isn't that the same as understanding what makes someone good? And isn't that the same as understanding virtue, which is what we're trying to define in the first place? The young man pauses, sensing the trap, but not quite seeing it clearly. I suppose, but surely we can recognize good and bad people when we see them.
Can we, though? Socrates presses gently. Don't good people sometimes do bad things? Don't bad people sometimes appear good? If virtue is knowing who deserves harm, then we need to know what virtue is before we can practice this kind of virtue. We're going in a circle. The young man is less confident now. His simple definition has become complicated. Well, then, perhaps virtue is the qualities themselves, courage and wisdom and self-control. Ah, yes. Let's consider that. Tell me, what is courage? Is it doing dangerous things? No, not just dangerous things, but facing danger when it's right to do so. So courage requires knowing when it's right to face danger. Yes, which means courage requires wisdom. I suppose so. And what about self-control? Isn't that also a kind of knowledge? Knowing which pleasures to pursue and which to avoid? It seems so. So all these virtues require wisdom, require knowledge of some kind. But then what is this knowledge? Knowledge of what? The young man is struggling now. Each answer leads to another question. Each definition dissolves under examination. What seemed clear and simple has become murky and complex. This is the Socratic method, the elenchus, as it comes to be called. It's not lecturing. It's not teaching in the traditional sense. Socrates doesn't tell people the answers. He asks them questions. He examines their beliefs. He tests their assumptions. He follows the implications of their statements to see where they lead. And almost always, they lead to confusion, to contradiction, to the recognition that what seemed like knowledge was really just unexamined opinion. But this isn't meant to be cruel. Socrates isn't trying to humiliate people, though they often feel humiliated. He's trying to help them, trying to awaken them from the sleep of false certainty, trying to show them that their unexamined lives are missing something essential. He compares himself to a midwife, like his mother Phainarete. He doesn't put knowledge into people. He helps them give birth to knowledge that's already inside them. He asks questions that prompt them to examine their own beliefs, to think for themselves, to discover their own contradictions, and clarify their own understanding.
It's a slow process, often painful, like childbirth itself. But when it works, when someone genuinely grasps something they didn't understand before, it's beautiful to watch. Their face changes, their eyes light up. They've seen something true, not because Socrates told them, but because they figured it out themselves. The days pass in the agora. Socrates talks with merchants about justice, with soldiers about courage, with priests about piety, with craftsmen about excellence, with politicians about governance, with anyone who will engage with him. Some conversations last hours, stretching from morning to afternoon, with small crowds gathering to listen. Others are brief, ending when the person grows frustrated or angry, or realizes they're late for some appointment. Not everyone appreciates his method. Many people find him annoying. He asks too many questions. He won't accept simple answers. He makes conversations that should be straightforward into complicated philosophical investigations. He wastes time that could be spent on practical matters. Others find him threatening. By showing that respected people don't really know what they claim to know, he undermines their authority. By questioning traditional beliefs, he seems to attack the foundations of society. By encouraging young men to think for themselves, he appears to corrupt them. But some, a few, recognize something valuable in what he's doing. They see that beneath his questions is a deep commitment to truth, a refusal to accept easy answers, a willingness to follow an argument wherever it leads, regardless of consequences. They see that he's not trying to tear down for the sake of destruction, but to clear away false beliefs so that true understanding can grow. These few become his companions, his students, though he refuses to call them that. They follow him through the agora. They listen to his conversations. They try to learn his method. They're drawn to him not by what he teaches, because he claims to teach nothing, but by who he is, by his integrity, his courage, his absolute dedication to truth. Among them is Plato, still young, from a wealthy aristocratic family, brilliant and idealistic. He listens raptly as Socrates questions and examines. He begins to write down these conversations, preserving them, elaborating on them, turning them into the dialogues that will make Socrates immortal. There's Xenophon, too, more practical, more conventional, but equally devoted. He'll write his own accounts of Socrates, different from Plato's, more down to earth, showing another side of the philosopher.
There's Aristippus, who focuses on Socrates' ideas about pleasure and the good life. Antisthenes, who emphasizes self-sufficiency and virtue. And Euclides, who will found his own school. And others, each taking something different from Socrates, each understanding him in their own way. But the most fascinating, perhaps the most troubled, is Alcibiades. Beautiful, wealthy, charming, ambitious, Alcibiades is everything Socrates is not. He's the golden boy of Athens, desired by everyone, successful in everything he attempts. But he's drawn to Socrates like a moth to flame, fascinated by this ugly man who seems immune to his charms, who cares nothing for wealth or beauty or power, who values only truth and virtue. The relationship between them is complex, intense, never quite definable. Alcibiades wants to possess Socrates somehow, to win him over, to be special to him. But Socrates maintains a careful distance, treating Alcibiades with the same philosophical rigor he applies to everyone, refusing to be swayed by beauty or flattery. Years later, Alcibiades will say that when Socrates speaks, it's like being bitten by a snake. The words sink in, and you feel something you've never felt before. Shame. Not for doing wrong, but for living wrong. Shame for pursuing wealth and fame when you should be pursuing virtue and wisdom. Shame for sleeping through your life instead of waking up to truth. The afternoons grow long in the agora. Shadows stretch across the marble. The crowds thin as people head home for dinner, but often Socrates continues talking, following a question to its conclusion, helping someone work through a difficulty, clarifying a confusion. Sometimes he's invited to symposia, drinking parties where educated men gather to talk and philosophize. He goes, though he drinks little, and there too he asks his questions, examines beliefs, helps others examine themselves.
Sometimes he falls into one of his trances, standing still for hours, lost in thought. His companions have learned to leave him alone during these episodes, to let him work through whatever problem has captured his mind. He always returns eventually, often with some new insight, some new angle on an old question. The questions themselves never change much. What is virtue? What is justice? What is courage? What is wisdom? What is the good life? How should we live? What matters most? The same questions, asked in different ways, of different people, in different contexts. Never answered definitively, always probed deeper, always revealing new complexities, new difficulties, new mysteries. Some people ask him, "Socrates, why do you keep asking these questions if you never find answers? Isn't it pointless? Isn't it frustrating?"
And he replies, perhaps with a smile, "The unexamined life is not worth living. If we don't question our beliefs, if we don't test our assumptions, if we just accept what we're told and live according to convention, then we're not really living as humans should. We're just sleepwalking through life. Better to ask questions we can't answer than to live in comfortable ignorance." The evening comes. The agora empties finally. The merchants pack up their goods. The last customers hurry home. The colonnades stand empty and quiet, waiting for tomorrow. Socrates walks home slowly, barefoot as always, his mind still working on whatever question has occupied him today. Perhaps he's made progress, perhaps not. But he'll return tomorrow and the day after and every day, asking his questions, examining beliefs, trying to help people wake up to truth. Above him, the stars emerge, the same stars that have watched over Athens for centuries, the same stars that will watch long after Socrates is gone, eternal and unchanging, while below, everything flows and changes and passes away. But some things endure, some things matter. Truth matters, virtue matters, the examined life matters. And somewhere in the darkness, someone he talked with today is lying awake, thinking about the questions he asked, unable to sleep, unable to go back to comfortable ignorance. The gadfly has done his work. Another person has been stung into awareness. Tomorrow will bring new conversations, new questions, new examinations. But tonight, let us rest with Socrates. In the quiet of evening, in the peace of someone living exactly as they should, doing exactly what they were meant to do.
The sun filters through olive branches. Dappled light falls on a small group of young men sitting in the shade, listening. They're outside the city walls today, away from the noise and bustle of the agora, in a grove sacred to the hero Academus. The air is cooler here, filled with the sound of cicadas, the rustle of leaves, the occasional bird call. Socrates sits with them, not at the center exactly, but somehow the focus anyway. He's older now, perhaps in his 60s, his beard fully gray, his face lined by decades of sun and thought. But his eyes are still bright, still curious, still seeking. The young men around him come from different backgrounds. Some are wealthy aristocrats, educated in all the traditional subjects, dressed in fine clothes, accustomed to respect and privilege. Others are less fortunate, sons of merchants or craftsmen, drawn by curiosity rather than family expectation. A few are foreigners, medics living in Athens, unable to be citizens but eager to learn.
What unites them is their fascination with Socrates, their willingness to have their beliefs examined, their hunger for something more than conventional wisdom. Let's look at them more closely, these companions who will carry forward his legacy. There, with the intense dark eyes and aristocratic bearing, that's Plato.
He's in his 20s now, from one of Athens' most distinguished families. His real name is Aristocles, but everyone calls him Plato, possibly because of his broad shoulders or his broad forehead. The ancient sources disagree. He was meant for politics. His family expected it. His connections assured it. But then he met Socrates, and everything changed. Plato watches Socrates with an attention that borders on devotion. He's not just listening, he's memorizing. Every word, every gesture, every nuance of argument. Later, years later, he'll write it all down. He'll create the dialogues that preserve Socrates' voice, or at least Plato's version of that voice, for eternity. But that's in the future. For now, he's young, idealistic, believing that philosophy can transform not just individuals, but entire cities. He dreams of philosopher kings, of societies governed by wisdom rather than power, of education that creates virtue rather than just teaching skills. Socrates is more skeptical of these grand dreams, but he sees the brilliance in Plato, the rare combination of intellectual power and moral seriousness. If anyone will understand what he's trying to do, if anyone will carry it forward, it might be this intense young aristocrat. Nearby sits Xenophon, different from Plato in almost every way. Where Plato is philosophical, abstract, interested in forms and universals, Xenophon is practical, concrete, interested in how to live well. He's a soldier by training, a man of action more than contemplation. He's drawn to Socrates not for metaphysical insights, but for ethical guidance, for understanding how to be a good person, a good citizen, a good leader. He'll write about Socrates too, but differently. His Socrates is more conventional, more religious, more focused on practical wisdom than on abstract truth. Some will say Xenophon didn't really understand Socrates. Others will say he simply knew a different side of him, the side that was less paradoxical, more accessible, more human. Both accounts are true in their way. Socrates was large enough to mean different things to different people. There's Antisthenes, older than most of the others, already in his 40s. He focuses on Socrates' emphasis on self-sufficiency, on not needing external things for happiness. He lives simply, almost ascetically, wearing a single rough cloak, owning almost nothing. He argues that virtue is sufficient for happiness, that we need nothing else, that wealth and pleasure and reputation are all irrelevant to the good life. Socrates respects his commitment, but sometimes teases him gently. "I can see your vanity through the holes in your cloak," he once said. Even in rejecting conventional values, we can become proud of our rejection, can turn asceticism into its own form of vanity. And there's Aristippus, Antisthenes' opposite in many ways. Where Antisthenes rejects pleasure, Aristippus embraces it, arguing that pleasure is the good we should pursue. But not mindlessly, not as slaves to desire, rather with wisdom and moderation. Taking pleasure when it's appropriate, but never becoming dependent on it, never letting it control us. Socrates questions both extremes, neither rejecting pleasure nor making it the highest good. As always, he wants them to think more carefully, to examine their assumptions, to understand the full complexity of the question. The most troubling figure in this circle, the most fascinating and tragic, is Alcibiades. He's not here today. He's rarely here anymore. His life has taken him in directions that worry everyone who knows him, ambitious directions, dangerous directions. But there was a time when he followed Socrates constantly, when their relationship was the talk of Athens. Alcibiades is beautiful beyond measure, wealthy beyond need, talented beyond reason. Everything comes easily to him: sports, politics, war, seduction. He's charismatic, charming, capable of winning over any crowd. He should be perfectly happy, but he's not. Something in him is restless, hungry, never satisfied. He chases pleasure and power with equal intensity, collecting victories and lovers like other men collect coins, but nothing fills the emptiness inside. When he's with Socrates, something changes. The philosopher is immune to his beauty, unmoved by his charm, interested only in his soul. And this fascinates Alcibiades, frustrates him, attracts him irresistibly. He wants to seduce Socrates, not just physically, but spiritually. He wants to possess him somehow, to be special to him. But Socrates maintains his distance, treats Alcibiades as he treats everyone, with philosophical care, but without special favor. There's a famous story, whether true or embellished, we can't know, but it captures something real.
Once at a symposium, after much wine, Alcibiades burst in late and crowned Socrates with a wreath, declaring him the wisest man in Athens. Then he spoke, his words slurred with wine, but his emotion genuine. He talked about how Socrates affected him, how the philosopher's words were like snake bites, injecting something that hurt and burned, but also clarified. How Socrates alone among all men made him feel ashamed, not for doing wrong things, but for living wrong. How he would run away from Socrates, avoiding him for months, pursuing his political ambitions and pleasures, but then hear him speak again and feel that shame return, that recognition that his whole life was misdirected. "He's like a satyr," Alcibiades said, referring to the ugly but magical creatures of myth. "Ugly on the outside, but if you could open him up, you'd find golden statues of the gods inside." Socrates listened to all this with his usual equanimity, neither pleased nor displeased by the praise. When Alcibiades finished, Socrates simply turned to the others and said something like, "He's drunk. We shouldn't take him too seriously." But everyone knew the relationship was significant, complex, important to both of them in ways neither quite understood. Now, Alcibiades is drifting away, pursuing glory in ways that worry his friends. He'll become a general, lead campaigns, achieve great victories, and eventually betray Athens and flee to Sparta. His life will end in assassination, far from home, his potential wasted, his gifts turned to destruction. Socrates will be blamed for Alcibiades' failures. People will say he corrupted this brilliant young man, led him astray with philosophy. But perhaps the truth is opposite. Perhaps Socrates tried to save him, tried to turn him toward virtue, but Alcibiades wasn't strong enough to follow that difficult path. The group talks about courage today. What is it really? Is the soldier who stands in battle courageous? What about the person who endures pain quietly? Or someone who stands up for truth despite consequences? Are all these the same virtue, or different things sharing a name? The young men propose definitions. Socrates questions each one. They refine their answers. He questions again. Slowly, through this process, they begin to see deeper into the question, to understand its complexity, to recognize how much they assumed without really knowing. This is what draws them to Socrates, this process of discovery. Not lectures, not being told what to think,
but being guided to think for themselves, to examine their own beliefs, to discover their own contradictions and confusions. It's difficult, sometimes frustrating, but also exhilarating. Like climbing a mountain, exhausting but rewarding, each step revealing new vistas.
They're not just learning philosophy, they're learning to philosophize. Not just absorbing knowledge, but developing the skills to think clearly, to question assumptions, to follow arguments logically, to care more about truth than about winning debates or impressing others. Some of them will become teachers themselves. They'll found their own schools, develop their own philosophies, attract their own students. Some will emphasize pleasure, others virtue, others knowledge. Some will focus on logic, others on ethics, others on metaphysics. They'll disagree with each other, sometimes sharply, each claiming to represent the true teaching of Socrates. And perhaps they're all right. Perhaps Socrates was large enough, his method open enough, that different people could take different lessons from him. He never wrote anything down, never created a systematic philosophy. He just asked questions, examined lives, tried to help people wake up to truth. The afternoon passes slowly. The shadows lengthen. The heat begins to ease. Someone produces bread and cheese, simple food shared among friends. They eat and talk, the conversation flowing naturally from serious philosophical questions to jokes, to gossip, to questions again. This is part of what they love, this blend of serious and playful, of important and trivial. Socrates never loses sight of the fact that they're human beings, living human lives. Philosophy isn't about escaping humanity, it's about living it more fully, more consciously, more excellently. As evening approaches, they begin to drift back toward the city. Walking in small groups, still talking, relationships forming that will last lifetimes. Plato walks with Xenophon for a while. Though they're very different, they respect each other. Antisthenes argues with Aristippus about pleasure, their debate continuing tomorrow and the day after, and probably for years. Socrates walks alone for a bit, giving them space, letting them process what they've discussed. He's tired, the way you're tired after good work, satisfied but drained. These conversations take effort, real effort, keeping track of arguments, spotting assumptions, guiding without dictating, helping without telling. But it's worth it. He sees them growing, developing, becoming more thoughtful, more careful, more committed to truth. Not all of them will continue. Some will drift away back to conventional lives, but some will carry forward what they've learned here. Some will change the world. The city walls come into view.
Athens in evening light, familiar and beloved despite all its flaws. The Acropolis glows golden in the setting sun. Smoke rises from countless hearths as families prepare dinner. The sounds of the city drift out, voices and laughter and the everyday music of human life. Socrates pauses for a moment, looking at the city, feeling a complex mixture of love and concern. This is his city. These are his people. He spent his whole life here, will spend the rest of it here. He's tried to serve Athens, not by flattering it or telling it what it wants to hear, but by questioning it, examining it, trying to make it better. Not everyone appreciates this service. He knows that. There are people who resent him, who see him as a troublemaker, who wish he would just be quiet and stop asking uncomfortable questions. The tensions are growing. the political situation becoming more volatile, old certainties crumbling. But he can't stop. This is who he is. This is what he does. Like his mother helping women give birth, he helps people give birth to truth. The process is painful sometimes, but necessary. Better painful truth than comfortable ignorance. The group gathers again at the city gates, saying their farewells. "Same time tomorrow?" someone asks. "Perhaps," Socrates says with a smile. "If I'm still around, if there are still questions to ask, if you're still willing to have your beliefs examined." They laugh. Of course they'll be there. Where else would they go? What else matters as much as this search for truth, this examination of life, this pursuit of wisdom? One by one they disperse, heading to their various homes, carrying with them the questions of the day, the unresolved puzzles, the new insights. Tonight they'll think about what was discussed. Tomorrow they'll come back with new ideas, new questions, new confusions to work through. And Socrates, he walks home slowly, barefoot as always, his mind already working on tomorrow's conversations. The questions never end. The examination never stops. Until death, which will come soon enough, he'll keep asking, keep probing, keep trying to help people wake up. The stars emerge one by one, ancient lights watching over this small man walking through this small city on this small planet. But what happens here matters. What he does matters. The conversations matter. The questions matter. Truth matters. Always and everywhere, truth matters. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, someone is thinking about the question Socrates asked today, unable to dismiss it, unable to return to comfortable certainty, beginning perhaps to understand what philosophy really means. The gadfly has done his work again. Another soul has been stung into wakefulness, and tomorrow it will happen again.
The year is 406 before Christ. Athens is tired. The Peloponnesian War has dragged on for decades now, draining the city's wealth, killing its young men, testing its spirit. The great power that once dominated the Aegean Sea is struggling, making mistakes, suffering defeats. The political atmosphere is tense, suspicious, fearful. In times of crisis, people look for someone to blame. Someone must be responsible for the defeats, the hardships, the losses. And in a democracy, blame can fall anywhere. The Argenisa trial shows how bad things have become. Athens has won a naval victory, but in the storm afterward, the generals failed to rescue survivors clinging to wreckage. Hundreds of men drowned who might have been saved. The people are outraged, grief turning to anger, anger demanding justice. The assembly votes to try all the generals together, which is illegal, against Athenian law. Each should have a separate trial. But the mob is angry, impatient with legal niceties, demanding immediate revenge. Socrates happens to be serving in the council that year, a position that rotates among citizens. When the illegal motion comes to a vote, when it's clear that the assembly wants to proceed despite the law, most of the council members are afraid to object. The crowd is ugly, dangerous. Speaking against them could be fatal. But Socrates refuses to vote for something illegal. He stands alone, one man against the angry mob, insisting that the law must be followed even when it's unpopular, especially
when it's unpopular. Because if laws only matter when they're convenient, then they don't really matter at all. The crowd threatens him. They shout, they rage, but he doesn't budge. Not out of stubbornness, not out of pride, but out of principle. The law is the law. Justice is justice. Popularity doesn't change what's right. Eventually, the illegal vote proceeds anyway, overriding his objection. The generals are convicted and executed, even those who weren't actually present at the battle. It's a travesty, a moment when Athens fails to live up to its own ideals, when fear and anger override justice. But people remember Socrates' stand. Some admire his courage. Others wonder if he's dangerous. This man who values abstract principles over practical necessities, who stands alone against the will of the people. A year later, Athens finally loses the war.
Sparta triumphs. The long walls connecting Athens to its port are torn down. The empire is dissolved. A Spartan garrison occupies the Acropolis. And worst of all, the democracy is overthrown, replaced by a brutal oligarchy of 30 tyrants, appointed by Sparta to govern Athens. These 30 tyrants are ruthless. They execute opponents, confiscate property, spread terror through the city. Anyone suspected of democratic sympathies is in danger. The free speech that Athens prided itself on, the openness to debate and discussion, all that disappears. Now speaking freely can cost you your life. Some of Socrates' former companions are among the 30. Critias, who once followed Socrates, is one of the leaders, the most brutal of them. Charmides, Plato's uncle, also Socrates' former companion, is another. They use what they learned from philosophy not for truth or virtue, but for power and cruelty. This is dangerous for Socrates. People will associate him with these tyrants. They'll say he taught them, corrupted them, turned them toward evil. And there's just enough truth to make the charge stick. They did listen to his questions. They did learn his methods. But they learned the questioning without the ethics, the technique without the virtue. The tyrants themselves try to implicate Socrates. They order him to arrest Leon of Salamis, a wealthy man whose property they want to confiscate, who has done nothing wrong except be rich. It's a test. Will Socrates obey? Will he participate in their injustice? His friends beg him to comply. It's just one arrest, one man. Your life is worth more than a futile gesture of defiance. Just do what they say, survive, wait for better times. But Socrates refuses. He doesn't make a grand speech. He doesn't publicly denounce the tyrants. He simply goes home. He won't arrest Leon. He won't participate in injustice. If they want to kill him for that, so be it. But he won't become a tool of tyranny. By luck, or perhaps the gods' intervention, the 30 fall before they can punish him. Their brutality sparks resistance. Democratic forces gather at Piraeus, civil war breaks out, and eventually, miraculously, the democracy is restored. The tyrants are killed or exiled. Athens breathes freely again. But the damage is done. The city is traumatized, divided, suspicious. Democrats hate oligarchs. Oligarchs fear Democrats. Everyone suspects everyone. The old confidence is gone, replaced by anxiety and resentment. And Socrates? Socrates is a problem for everyone.
The Democrats remember that some tyrants were his companions. They suspect he sympathizes with oligarchy, that he despises democracy, that his questioning of politicians was always really an attack on the system itself. The oligarchs know he refused to help them. They know he values justice over loyalty, principle over power. They can't trust him either. Even his philosophical mission is suspect now. Before the war, questioning traditional beliefs seemed harmless, even valuable. Athens was confident, secure, able to tolerate dissent. But now, with the city defeated, traumatized, trying to rebuild, questioning seems dangerous. Maybe traditional beliefs need defending, not examining. Maybe young men need to be taught patriotism, not skepticism. Maybe stability matters more than truth. People start watching Socrates more carefully. His conversations in the agora, which once seemed merely eccentric, now seem potentially subversive. His questioning of respected citizens, which once seemed like harmless philosophy, now seems like attacks on social order. His influence on young men, which once seemed educational, now seems like corruption. The criticisms become more open, more pointed. Aristophanes writes a comedy, The Clouds, making fun of Socrates. In the play, Socrates runs a thinkery where he teaches young men to make the worse argument appear the better, to cheat their creditors, to disrespect their parents. It's satire, exaggeration, but it sticks. People laugh, and they remember. The real Socrates is nothing like this caricature. He doesn't charge money, doesn't teach rhetoric, doesn't encourage dishonesty. But the image takes hold anyway. Socrates the sophist, Socrates the corrupter, Socrates the atheist who speculates about clouds instead of honoring the gods. He ignores the play, mostly. It bothers him a little, not the mockery itself, but the misunderstanding. He's spent his life pursuing truth and virtue. He's tried to make Athens better, stronger, more thoughtful. And now he's portrayed as the opposite, as someone who undermines everything good. But he won't change what he does. He won't stop asking questions. He won't stop examining beliefs. The examined life is still worth living, even when it's dangerous, even when it's misunderstood. His friends worry about him. Plato and the others see the gathering storm. They urge him to be more careful, to moderate his criticism, to choose his words more diplomatically. The city is fragile right now. People are scared. This isn't the time for philosophical provocations. But Socrates can't moderate truth. Either you pursue it completely, or not at all. Either you examine your life honestly, or you live in comfortable delusion. There's no middle ground, no safe compromise. Would you rather I flatter Athens? He asks. Tell people what they want to hear, confirm their prejudices, let them sleep when they need to wake up? His friends have no answer. They know he's right, but they also know he's in danger. The evenings grow darker, not just literally, though winter is coming, but metaphorically. The atmosphere in Athens is oppressive. Old friends avoid each other, afraid of guilt by association. People inform on neighbors. The democracy that was restored is paranoid, seeing enemies everywhere, quick to anger, slow to forgive. Socrates continues his daily routine, walking barefoot through the agora, talking with whoever will engage him, asking his questions, examining beliefs, trying to help people think more clearly, live more virtuously, understand more deeply. But fewer people stop to talk now. Fewer are willing to be examined in public. The conversations are shorter, more guarded, less free. The openness that made philosophy possible is disappearing, replaced by fear and suspicion. He's in his 70s now. His body is still strong,
remarkably so for his age. But he's tired. Not physically tired, soul tired. Tired of the suspicion, tired of the misunderstanding, tired of trying to help a city that doesn't want his help. But he can't stop. This is who he is. This is what the god called him to do through the oracle at Delphi. Examine lives, ask questions, wake people up. Until death stops him, he'll continue. The storm is gathering. Everyone can feel it. Something is going to break. The tensions can't continue indefinitely. Either they'll dissipate, or they'll explode into something terrible. One night, walking home alone, Socrates looks up at the stars. The same stars he saw as a child. The same stars he saw during the war. The same stars that have watched over Athens for centuries, constant and eternal, while everything below changes and passes away. He thinks about death, not fearfully, just thoughtfully. It's coming, maybe soon, maybe from old age, maybe from something else. Does it matter? Death comes to everyone eventually. The question isn't whether we'll die, but whether we'll live well before we do.
Has he lived well? He thinks so. He's been true to himself, to his principles, to his calling. He's tried to help. He's pursued truth. He's examined his life and found it worth living. Whatever comes next, whether a few more years or just a few more days, he'll face it the same way he's faced everything. With courage, with honesty, with commitment to truth. The city sleeps around him, restless in its dreams, troubled by its past, anxious about its future. And somewhere in that sleeping city, someone is deciding that Socrates has to be stopped. Someone is planning the charges. Someone is gathering the courage to accuse the man who asks too many questions. The stars wheel slowly overhead. The night deepens, and dawn, when it comes, will bring the beginning of the end.
The year is 399 before Christ. Spring has come to Athens. The city is rebuilding, recovering from years of war and tyranny. Democracy has been restored. Life is returning to normal, or trying to. But beneath the surface, tensions remain. Old wounds haven't healed. Old fears haven't faded. And then the indictment comes. 3 men bring charges against Socrates. Meletus, a young poet, little known, probably put forward by more important figures behind him. Anytus, a wealthy tanner, a prominent democratic politician, respected and influential. And Lycon, an orator, skilled in persuasion. The charges are formal, written on a wax tablet, posted publicly for all to see. Socrates is guilty of corrupting the young and of not believing in the gods in whom the city believes, but in other new spiritual beings. The words seem simple, but they're deadly serious. These are capital charges. If convicted, Socrates could be executed. When Socrates hears about the indictment, his friends expect him to be worried, to start planning his defense, to hire lawyers, to seek help from influential people. This is how things are done in Athens. You gather support, you make deals, you find ways to win. But Socrates does none of this. He continues his daily routine, walking to the agora, talking with people, asking his questions, as if nothing has changed, as if he isn't on trial for his life. His friends are frantic. You need to prepare, they tell him. You need to take this seriously. These men want you dead.
I've been preparing my whole life, Socrates replies calmly. What better defense can there be than having lived well? But they insist. They draft speeches for him, elegant defenses full of rhetorical flourishes,
designed to move the jury emotionally. They beg him to use them. He reads them and shakes his head. "These are very clever," he says, "but they're not true to who I am. If I'm to be judged, let me be judged for what I actually believe, not for what sounds good." The preliminary hearings come and go. The accusations are formally stated. Socrates is given time to prepare. The date is set for the trial itself. Everything proceeds according to Athenian law, that democracy he once defended against the mob's desire to override it. The day of the trial arrives. It's a bright morning. The sun shines on the marketplace. A large crowd has gathered, hundreds of people, perhaps 500 or more who will serve as the jury. This is how Athens does justice, not with a small panel of experts, but with citizens, many citizens. Democracy in action. The jurors are chosen by lot from those who volunteer. They're paid a small fee, enough to make it possible for poor citizens to serve, but not enough to make it lucrative. They range in age from 30 to elderly, some educated, some not, some thoughtful, some easily swayed. A cross-section of Athens for better or worse. The trial will be decided by majority vote. No judges, no legal experts to guide them, just the wisdom or lack thereof of the crowd. The accusers speak first. Meletus stands and presents the case. He's young, nervous, not a natural speaker, but his words are damaging nonetheless. Socrates corrupts the young, filling their heads with dangerous ideas, teaching them to disrespect their parents, to question the gods, to undermine the city's traditions. Look at his former companions, Meletus says. Look at Critias and Charmides, tyrants who terrorized Athens. Look at Alcibiades, traitor who betrayed the city to its enemies. These men learned from Socrates. He shaped their thinking. He's responsible for their crimes. And the gods, Meletus continues? Socrates doesn't believe in them. Or if he does, not in the right way. He talks about a divine voice, a daemonion that speaks to him. What is this but introducing new gods? What is this but impiety? Anytus speaks next. More experienced, more effective. He doesn't focus on philosophy or theology. He focuses on politics, on loyalty, on patriotism. Athens has been through hell, he says. War, defeat, tyranny. The city is trying to heal, to reunite, to rebuild. And what does Socrates do? He questions everything. He undermines confidence. He makes young men skeptical of their elders, critical of their leaders, doubtful of their traditions. We need unity now, Anytus argues. We need people to pull together, to believe in Athens, to work for the common good. But Socrates divides us. His endless questioning serves no purpose but to create confusion and doubt. He's a luxury we can't afford, a danger we can't tolerate. Lycon adds his voice, briefer but pointed. The poets, the teachers, the craftsmen, all those Socrates has questioned and embarrassed over the years, they remember, they resent him, his arrogance, his certainty that everyone else is wrong, his mockery disguised as philosophy. The prosecution rests. The case seems strong. Corruption, impiety, disrespect, danger. The words hang in the air, heavy with accusation. Now it's Socrates' turn. He stands slowly, this old man in his simple cloak, barefoot as always,
his face calm, showing neither fear nor defiance. Just that same intense presence, that same focus that everyone who knows him recognizes. He looks at the jury, these hundreds of faces, some hostile, some sympathetic, most uncertain. And he begins to speak. Men of Athens. His voice is steady, clear, not loud, but somehow carrying to everyone present. He doesn't have notes, doesn't have a prepared speech in the conventional sense. He just speaks, honestly, directly, the way he always speaks. I don't know how you've been affected by my accusers. As for me, I was almost carried away by them. They spoke so persuasively. Yet they've hardly spoken a word of truth. He addresses their charges methodically. First, the old accusations, the ones from Aristophanes' comedy. The image of Socrates as a sophist who speculates about the heavens and makes the worse argument appear the better. I've never claimed expertise in these things, he says. I don't study natural philosophy. I don't teach rhetoric for money. Anyone who's actually talked to me knows this. But these false ideas have spread, and they're harder to fight than direct accusations. Then the charge of corrupting the young.
Meletus claims I corrupt the youth intentionally. But think about this. If I corrupt them, I make them worse. And if they become worse, they'll eventually harm me, because bad people harm those around them. So would I intentionally make people worse, knowing they'll harm me? That makes no sense. Perhaps I corrupt them unintentionally then. But if so, the proper response is to teach me, to show me my error, not to bring me to trial. You don't punish people for unintentional mistakes, you educate them. He questions Meletus directly, using his usual method. Tell me, Meletus, who improves the young? Who makes them better? Meletus seems flustered by the question. The laws, the jurors, the assembly, all good citizens improve them. So everyone in Athens improves the young except me? I alone corrupt them? Does this seem reasonable? With horses, isn't it the opposite? Isn't there one trainer who improves them while the many ruin them? Why would humans be different? The jury listens, some nodding, some frowning. This isn't how defendants usually speak. This isn't begging or flattering or appealing to emotion. This is argument, logic, the same questioning that made Socrates famous or infamous. Then he addresses the charge about the gods. Meletus accuses me of not believing in the gods. But he also says I introduce new spiritual beings. How can I do both? If I believe in spiritual beings, mustn't I believe in spirits? And if I believe in spirits, which are gods or children of gods, then I believe in gods. The accusation contradicts itself. He's calm throughout, almost as if he's in the agora having one of his usual conversations, not on trial for his life. Some jurors appreciate this dignity. Others find it offensive. Doesn't he understand the seriousness of his situation? Doesn't he fear death? And then he explains his mission. He tells them about the oracle at Delphi, about Chaerephon's question, about the god's answer that no one is wiser than Socrates, about his confusion and his investigation, talking to politicians and poets and craftsmen, discovering that those who claim wisdom don't actually have it, that human wisdom is worth little or nothing, that the wisest person is the one who knows they know nothing. This mission, examining myself and others, this is what the God commanded me to do, and I can't abandon it, not for fear of death, not for anything. To fear death is to think you're wise when you're not, because no one knows what death is. It might be the greatest good. But to abandon what I know is right,
what the god commanded, that would definitely be wrong.
His voice grows stronger. Men of Athens, I respect and love you, but I will obey the god rather than you. As long as I breathe and am able, I won't stop philosophizing, exhorting you, examining anyone I meet. I'll say, my friend, you're an Athenian, from the greatest city, renowned for wisdom and power. Aren't you ashamed to care about money and reputation while caring nothing for wisdom and truth and improving your soul? This is my service to the god and to you. I go about like a gadfly, stinging the great horse of Athens, keeping it from becoming lazy and complacent. The god has attached me to this city, and you won't easily find another like me. Some in the crowd murmur, is this defense or defiance? Is he trying to win them over or challenge them? Perhaps you'll kill me, Anytus suggests it, and then you'll sleep undisturbed for the rest of your lives, unless the god sends you another gadfly. But consider, harming me would harm you more than it harms me. I've lived 70 years. Death comes soon enough anyway. But you, if you kill me, you'll harm yourselves. You'll lose someone trying to help you, even if you don't realize it. He addresses why he hasn't entered politics. Some ask why I don't advise the city publicly, why I don't speak in the assembly. The reason is my daimonion, my divine sign. It comes to me sometimes, a voice that stops me from doing things. It has always opposed my entering politics, and rightly so, because anyone who genuinely fights for justice won't survive long in public life. The righteous must work privately, helping individuals, not trying to influence the mob. He mentions his military service, his stand against the illegal trial during the Argonusei affair, his refusal to arrest Leon under the 30 tyrants. I've never compromised justice for politics or for safety. I've always done what's right, regardless of consequences. Then he does something unexpected. Most defendants bring their families to court, their children crying, their wives begging for mercy. They appeal to the jury's emotions. They plead for pity. This is normal. This is how you defend yourself in Athens. But Socrates refuses. I have sons, he says, 3 of them. I could bring them here, ask you to acquit me for their sake, but I won't. Not because I'm arrogant, but because it would be wrong. It would be using them as tools. It would be appealing to your pity instead of your judgment, and it would dishonor both them and me.
You've sworn an oath as jurors to judge according to the laws. I shouldn't ask you to break that oath, and I shouldn't model for my sons that justice can be begged for rather than earned. If I've done wrong, I should be punished. If I've done right, I should be acquitted. Not because you pity me, but because it's just. He stands there, having said what he believes, having explained himself honestly, having refused to compromise his principles, even to save his life. Some in the crowd are moved, others are angry, most are confused. This isn't how defendants behave. This isn't how you save yourself. The jury votes. Each man takes 2 bronze discs, one solid, one with a hole in the center. Solid means guilty. Hollow means innocent. They file past 2 urns, depositing 1 disc in each. One urn counts, the other doesn't. The system ensures secrecy. No one knows how any individual voted. The votes are counted. The tension is palpable. Socrates stands calmly, waiting. His friends in the crowd are pale with worry. The accusers watch intently. Finally, the result. Guilty, but only by a small margin. Of about 500 jurors, perhaps 280 voted guilty, 220 innocent. If just 30 men had voted differently, Socrates would have been acquitted. The crowd stirs, some satisfied, some disappointed. Socrates himself seems unmoved, as if the result changes nothing, as if he expected it or doesn't care. But the trial isn't over. In Athenian law, after a guilty verdict, there's a second vote. The prosecution proposes a penalty. The defendant proposes an alternative. The jury chooses between them. Meletus stands and proposes death. The word hangs in the air. Final. Absolute. No appeal. No reprieve. Just death. Now Socrates must propose an alternative penalty. His friends have prepared for this. They have money. They'll offer to pay a large fine. The jury might accept that. They might prefer money to blood. There's still a chance. But Socrates does something that shocks everyone. He says he's done Athens a service, not a crime. He's tried to help the city, to make it better. Therefore, he proposes as his penalty free meals in the Prythaneum, the great honor given to Olympic victors and public benefactors.
The crowd gasps. Is he joking? Is he mad? He's been found guilty, and he's asking for an honor? His friends are horrified. This is suicide. This will enrage the jury. Those who voted to acquit will feel insulted. Those who voted to convict will feel vindicated. Perhaps sensing their dismay, Socrates quickly modifies his proposal. Very well. My friends Plato and Crito and others offer to pay a fine on my behalf. 30 minae. It's a substantial sum, though not enormous. More of a token than a true punishment. But the damage is done. The jury has heard the first proposal. They've heard his claim that he deserves honor, not punishment, and they're angry. The second vote is quick. Death. By a much larger margin this time, perhaps 360 to 140. Many who voted to acquit in the first vote now vote for death. He's left them no choice, or so they feel. Socrates is condemned. He will die by drinking hemlock, the traditional Athenian method of execution, relatively quick, relatively painless, as merciful as execution can be. He's allowed to speak again, briefly, after the verdict. Perhaps you expected me to beg for my life, he says to those who voted to condemn him, but that would have been wrong. I'm not angry with you. Well, perhaps a little, because you didn't give me enough time to explain properly. If we had a law like other cities, where capital trials last several days instead of just one, I think you would have been persuaded. But don't think you've silenced me by killing me. Others will take my place, younger men, less gentle perhaps, who will examine you even more strictly. The only way to avoid being questioned is to become better people, to actually become wise instead of just thinking you are. And then, strangely, he addresses those who voted to acquit him, his friends in the jury. Don't be sad for me. This might be a good thing. My daimonion, my divine sign, always stops me when I'm about to do something wrong. But today it never came. Not when I left home for the trial, not during my speech, not when I spoke the words that condemned me. This suggests death is not an evil. Think about it. Death is one of two things. Either it's like a dreamless sleep, peaceful and quiet, nothing to fear, or it's a journey to another place where all the dead have gone. Imagine meeting Homer and Hesiod.
Imagine talking with heroes of old. Imagine examining them, asking if they're truly wise. That would be amazing. Either way, death holds no terror. His voice is calm, even cheerful.
But now it's time to go. I to die, you to live. Which is better? Only the God knows. The trial is over. The crowd begins to disperse. Some quietly satisfied that justice has been done. Others troubled, uncertain, feeling that something has gone wrong but unable to say exactly what. Socrates is led away by the officers, not to prison immediately, but home for now. The execution won't happen right away. There's a religious festival. A sacred ship has been sent to Delos. No executions can occur until it returns. The law gives him a month, perhaps more, to live. His friends gather around him as he walks. They're devastated. Plato is pale, fighting tears. Crito looks stricken. Apollodorus openly weeps. They've lost. The city has condemned the best man they've ever known. But Socrates is serene. "Come now," he says gently. "This isn't unexpected. I've been preparing for death my whole life. Why should I fear it now? Let's use this time well. Let's talk. Let's think. There are still questions to explore, still truths to examine." The sun is setting over Athens. Long shadows stretch across the agora. The day that began with a trial ends with a condemned man walking home, surrounded by grieving friends, facing death, yet somehow, impossibly, at peace. The stars will come out soon, the eternal stars, and beneath them, in a small house in Athens, a philosopher will spend his last days doing what he's always done: talking, questioning, examining life, helping others think more clearly, live more nobly, understand more deeply. Death is coming, but until it arrives, there's work to do. There are always questions to ask, always truths to pursue, always lives to examine. The gadfly has been sentenced, but he hasn't been silenced. Not yet.
The prison is small, simple, just a room, really. Stone walls, a hard floor, a small window high up letting in light and air. Nothing comfortable, nothing luxurious. But Socrates doesn't need luxury. He's spent his life with little. This is just more of the same. But he's not alone. Athenian law allows condemned prisoners to receive visitors, and his friends come every day. Plato and Crito, Apollodorus and Simmias, Cebes and Phaedo, others too. Sometimes just a few, sometimes a crowd. All wanting to spend time with him while they can, all trying to make sense of what's happening, all grieving for what they're about to lose. Socrates receives them calmly, not with the resignation of someone who's given up, but with genuine peace, perhaps even joy.
as if these last days are a gift rather than a tragedy, as if having time to talk with friends, to explore questions, to philosophize, is exactly what he would choose to do regardless of the circumstances. The first days are spent in conversation, not about practical matters, not about appeals or escapes, but about the same things they've always discussed: justice and virtue, knowledge and opinion, the nature of the soul, what makes a life worth living. Sometimes they fall into the old pattern: Socrates asking questions, the others answering, slowly working through a problem together. Sometimes the friends ask him what he thinks, wanting to hear his views while they still can. Sometimes they just sit quietly, being together, no words necessary. Crito comes early one morning, very early, before dawn. He's been awake all night, agitated, troubled. He finds Socrates sleeping peacefully, not restless despite everything. When Socrates wakes, Crito is sitting there, watching him. "Why didn't you wake me?" Socrates asks. "I didn't want to disturb you. You were sleeping so well. I've never seen anyone face death so calmly. At my age, death shouldn't be surprising or unwelcome. But Crito has come with a purpose, an urgent one. Socrates, I have news. The ship from Delos has been spotted. It will arrive today or tomorrow, which means your execution will be soon after. We're running out of time." He leans forward, speaking quickly, earnestly. "But we can still save you. I've made arrangements. I have money. The guards can be bribed. There's a place prepared, friends who will shelter you, a route out of Athens. We can do this. We can get you to safety." Socrates listens without interrupting. "I know you'll object," Crito continues. "You'll say it's illegal, that escaping would be wrong. But think about it. This verdict is unjust. The city has wronged you. You owe it nothing. And think of your sons. They need their father. Think of us. We need you. How can we live with ourselves if we let you die when we could have saved you?" He's almost begging now. "People will think we didn't care enough to help you. They'll think we valued money more than your life. Please, Socrates, for our sake, if not for yours, let us help you escape." The plea hangs in the air. Socrates is quiet for a moment. Then he smiles, gently, affectionately. "My dear Crito, your eagerness to help me is worth more than all the money in Athens. But we can't decide what's right based on what people will think. We have to decide based on the truth. Let me ask you some questions, the way I always do. You don't mind, do you? Even now?" Crito shakes his head, a bit impatiently, but willing to listen. "We agree, don't we, that we shouldn't care about what most people think. We should care about what those who understand think, the experts, the wise." "Yes, but..." "And we agree that living well matters more than simply living, that we should care more about the quality of life than its length." "Yes." "And living well means the same as living honorably and justly." "Yes." So, the question isn't whether we can escape or whether people will criticize us. The question is whether escaping would be just. If it's just, we should do it. If it's unjust, we shouldn't, even if staying means death. Crito is silent now,
seeing where this is going, but hoping somehow for a different conclusion. Let's think about it this way, Socrates continues. The laws of Athens speak to me. They say, Socrates, we gave you life. Your father married your mother according to our laws. We educated you. We protected you. For 70 years, you've lived under our authority, enjoying our benefits. Now we've judged you, perhaps wrongly, but through our legal process. If you escape, you destroy us. You say that laws don't matter, that verdicts can be ignored when convenient. You undermine everything we represent. What would I answer to that? Socrates asks. That the verdict was unjust? Yes, but I had my chance to defend myself. I had my trial. I lost. If everyone who loses breaks the law, what happens to justice, to order, to the city itself?
I could have proposed exile as my penalty. The jury might have accepted that. Or I could have stayed silent my whole life, not attracting attention, not causing trouble. But I chose to philosophize. I chose to question. I chose to stand trial rather than compromise. Having made those choices, how can I now run away from their consequences? I've spent my life teaching that we should face consequences with courage, that we should do what's right regardless of personal cost, that honor matters more than life. How can I abandon those teachings now? What would I say to young men if I survived by breaking laws I claimed to respect? And where would I go? To Thebes? To Megara? Other cities with laws I'd be equally obligated to respect? Would I keep philosophizing there? And if I did, wouldn't someone say, "You claim to care about virtue and justice, but you broke your own city's laws to save yourself. Why should we listen to you?" Crito listens, his hope fading. He knows Socrates is right. Or, at least, he knows Socrates believes what he's saying, and he knows nothing will change his mind. This isn't stubbornness. It's principle. It's integrity. It's Socrates being exactly who he's always been.
So you'll stay, Crito says finally, more statement than question. I'll stay, not because I don't appreciate your offer, not because I want to die, but because running would be wrong, and I've never knowingly done wrong. I won't start now. The conversation ends. Crito leaves sadly, but accepting. The escape won't happen. Socrates will face his fate. The only question now is when. The days that follow are strange. Knowing that death is coming, that each day might be the last, yet living normally. Talking and thinking, laughing sometimes, being exactly himself. His family visits. Xanthippe, his wife. She's distraught, angry at the injustice, angry at Athens, perhaps even angry at Socrates for not fighting harder to survive. She brings their infant son. The two older boys come too. The meetings are painful, full of weeping and recriminations and desperate love. Socrates is gentle with them, but firm. He won't give them false hope. He won't pretend things might change. He comforts them as best he can, but he won't compromise what he believes, even for them. Eventually they leave, Xanthippe still crying, the boys confused and frightened. It's kinder this way, Socrates thinks. The final hours should be with his philosophical companions, with people who can discuss ideas rather than drown in emotion.
His family has their grief. He has his philosophy. The conversations with his friends grow deeper. They talk about death itself. What is it? Should we fear it? Does the soul survive? Socrates argues that the soul is immortal, that death is separation of soul from body, that the soul continues after, perhaps returning to life again in new bodies. The arguments are complex, drawing on mathematics and metaphysics, on the theory of forms that Plato will later develop further. Not everyone is convinced. Simmias and Cebes raise objections, good objections, thoughtful objections, and Socrates engages with them seriously, fairly, not dismissing doubt, but addressing it. Even now, facing death, he won't claim certainty he doesn't have. He'll follow the argument wherever it leads. What emerges isn't proof, not in any absolute sense, but something like reasonable hope, like a path through darkness. If we've lived philosophically, if we've practiced separating soul from body through thought, if we've pursued wisdom and virtue, then death need not be feared. It might even be welcomed. Philosophy, Socrates says, is practice for dying. We spend our lives trying to free the soul from the body's distractions, trying to focus on eternal truths rather than temporary pleasures. Death simply completes what we've been doing all along. Phaedo listens raptly. He's young, newer to the circle, less known than Plato or Crito, but he's observant. Years later, he'll tell this story, describing these last days, preserving the conversations, helping future generations understand what happened. He notices how calm Socrates is, how cheerful almost, not grim or resigned, but genuinely peaceful, as if death really doesn't frighten him, as if he's practiced for this moment so long that when it comes, it's natural, even welcome. The others notice too. Some find it inspiring, proof that philosophy works, that examined life really does prepare you for anything, including death. Others find it unsettling, this serenity in the face of execution. Is it courage? Delusion? Faith? They can't quite decide. But Socrates is consistent with himself. He's always said that death shouldn't be feared. He's always said that virtue matters more than life. He's always said that the worst thing isn't suffering or dying, but living badly. Now he's proving he believes it. The days pass one by one.
Each morning, he wakes wondering if this is the day. Each evening, he goes to sleep knowing he's one day closer. But he doesn't waste the time. He talks. He thinks. He helps his friends understand. He philosophizes until the very end. The ship from Delos is taking longer than expected. Bad weather, unfavorable winds. Days stretch into weeks. The waiting becomes almost harder than the execution itself. Suspended between life and death, unable to plan for either, just existing in this strange liminal space. But finally, word comes. The ship has been spotted. It will dock tomorrow, which means the day after tomorrow, at the latest, Socrates will die. The friends gather for what they know will be the last time. All of them, everyone who can possibly come. The small prison room is crowded. They sit on the floor, lean against walls, fill every available space. They want to be here, need to be here, can't imagine being anywhere else. Socrates looks at them all, these young men and older friends who have followed him, learned from him, loved him. His eyes are bright, not with tears, but with affection, with gratitude, with something like joy. Thank you, he says simply. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to my questions all these years. Thank you for caring about truth. He pauses, then smiles slightly. Shall we talk about something? We still have time, and there are always more questions. And so they do. One last conversation. One last examination. One last journey into truth together. The shadows lengthen. The evening comes, and still they talk, treasuring every moment, knowing tomorrow will bring something final, something they can't reverse or escape. The stars come out. The same eternal stars. And beneath them, in a small prison room, a philosopher spends his last night doing what he's always done, asking questions, seeking truth, living the examined life until the very end. The morning comes gently. Light filters through the small window of the prison cell. Dust motes drift in the sunbeams. Outside, Athens is waking. The sounds of the city beginning its day. Distant voices, footsteps, the bleating of goats. Life continuing as it always does. Inside the cell, Socrates is already awake. He slept well, remarkably well for someone facing execution. His friends spent the night outside the prison, unable to sleep, but Socrates rested peacefully. Perhaps he's at peace with what's coming. Perhaps he's simply exhausted. Either way, he rises calmly, ready for his last day. His friends are allowed in early. They enter quietly, their faces drawn from sleeplessness and grief. Plato isn't among them. He's ill, or so the story goes. Perhaps too ill to bear witnessing this. Perhaps too overwhelmed by emotion. The others come, though. Crito and Apollodorus, Semius and Cebes, Phaedo, and others. They fill the small room, silent, not knowing what to say. Socrates greets them warmly, as if this were any other morning. Good morning, friends. You're here early. I appreciate that. It gives us more time together. Xanthippe is there too, holding their baby, her eyes red from crying. When she sees the friends entering, she breaks down completely. Socrates, she cries out, this is the last time your friends will talk to you, the last time you'll talk to them. The outburst is anguished, raw, all the pain of a wife losing her husband pouring out. But Socrates, gently but firmly, asks Crito to take her home. It's not cruelty, it's mercy, for her and for everyone. These last hours need calm, need dignity. Overwhelming emotion won't help anyone. Crito leads her away, still weeping, clutching the baby. The sound of her sobs fades as she's taken home. The room becomes quiet again, sad but composed, ready for what must come. Socrates sits up, rubbing his leg. He'd been in chains during the night, his leg shackled to the wall. Now that the chains are removed, he rubs the place where they chafed, noting with interest the sensation. How strange, he says thoughtfully, the relationship between pleasure and pain. They seem opposite, but they're connected. When pain stops, pleasure follows. The relief of the chains being removed feels good precisely because they cause discomfort. One leads to the other, inseparably linked.
Even now, even on this morning, he's philosophizing, noting, questioning, examining experience. It's who he is. It's what he does. Death won't change that. Someone mentions Aesop, how he might have written a fable about pleasure and pain being yoked together by the gods. Socrates smiles. Yes, Aesop understood these things. But I've been writing poems lately. Did I mention that? This surprises them. Socrates has never written anything before. He's always been purely oral, talking but never recording. Why now? They ask. I've had recurring dreams, he explains, telling me to make music and work at it. I always thought this meant philosophy, that philosophy is the highest music. But in prison, I wondered, what if the dream meant literal music? So I've been composing hymns, setting Aesop's fables to verse, just in case. Just to be sure I've obeyed the god's command. It's characteristic of him, this scrupulous attention to divine signs, this care to do what's right, even in small things, this willingness to reconsider what he thought he understood. They talk for a while longer. The conversation flows naturally, touching on various topics, not forced, not desperate, just talk, the way they've always talked, about ideas and questions, about life and truth, about what matters. Socrates guides the conversation toward death, toward what comes after, toward the immortality of the soul, not because he's afraid, but because understanding death seems important, worth thinking about, worth getting right if possible. He presents arguments, careful philosophical arguments for why the soul might be immortal, because it's the source of life, and life's opposite is death. So how can that which gives life die? Because it's simple and unchanging, unlike the body, which is composite and constantly changing. Because it grasps eternal truths, forms, and universals, which suggest it's itself eternal. The friends listen, some convinced, some uncertain, some wanting to believe, but finding doubt creeping in. They raise objections. Socrates addresses them, not dismissively, not dogmatically, but thoughtfully, fairly, acknowledging difficulties while still arguing for hope. Even if we can't prove it absolutely, he says, living as if the soul is immortal, living as if virtue matters eternally, this is the best bet we can make. Better to live well and be wrong about immortality than to live badly and find out it's true. It's practical philosophy, not just abstract reasoning. It's about how to live, how to face death, how to maintain courage and integrity in the face of the unknown. The hours pass. Morning turns to afternoon. The conversation continues, sometimes deep, sometimes lighter. They laugh occasionally, remembering shared experiences, shared conversations. They fall silent sometimes, just being together, knowing these moments are precious, irreplaceable. The guards are respectful. They've come to know Socrates during his imprisonment. Unlike most prisoners, he doesn't rage or despair. He's courteous to them, treats them as human beings, talks with them when they're willing. They admire him, even as they prepare to kill him. Mid-afternoon, the officer in charge appears. His face is troubled. This is clearly difficult for him. Socrates, he says, I've come to tell you what I must tell all condemned prisoners. When I bring the poison, you must drink it. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Some prisoners curse us, blame us, make us drag out the process, but I don't think you'll do that. He pauses, visibly emotional.
You're the noblest, gentlest, best man who has ever come here. I know you're not angry with us. You know who's responsible for this. We're just doing our duty. Socrates stands and puts a hand on the man's shoulder. I know. I'm not angry. Thank you for your kindness. And don't worry. I'll do what needs to be done. The officer breaks down, tears running down his face. Farewell, he chokes out, and leaves quickly, unable to maintain his composure any longer. The friends are shaken, seeing the guard cry. If even the hardened prison officer weeps, how should they respond? But Socrates is calm. What a fine man, he says simply. He's been kind to me throughout. The time draws closer. Socrates asks if he should bathe before taking the poison. It's customary, a final act of cleanliness, of preparation. The attendants confirm yes, it would be proper. He goes to bathe, taking his time, not rushing. His friends wait, the minutes crawling by, each one precious, each one bringing them closer to the end. When he returns, his skin still damp, his hair wet, he looks refreshed, clean, ready. The bath was practical, but also symbolic, a washing away, a preparation for transition. The sun is setting now. Golden light slants through the window. The day is ending, and with it, a life is ending, too.
Socrates' sons are brought in, the two older boys and the baby. Some female relatives come too. He speaks with them privately, giving final instructions, offering comfort. The friends wait outside, giving him this last intimate time with family. When the relatives leave, they're weeping, but Socrates is composed. He said what needed to be said, made his peace. There's nothing left but the final act. Crito asks, hesitantly, "Is there anything we can do for you? Anything you want us to take care of? Your family, your affairs, anything?" Socrates smiles gently. "Just what I've always told you. Take care of yourselves. Live examined lives. That's the best thing you can do for me, for yourselves, for everyone. Nothing else matters as much." "And your burial?" Crito asks. "How should we bury you?" Socrates laughs, actually laughs. "However you want, but first you'll have to catch me. You keep talking as if I am this body you'll be burying, but I'm not. I'm the soul that's been talking to you all these years. The body is just a body. Do with it what's customary. Don't trouble yourselves too much about it." The attendant appears with the cup. It's a simple vessel, clay or bronze, containing the poison, hemlock, a plant extract, relatively quick, relatively painless compared to other methods. The Athenians consider it humane. The man carrying it is professional, solemn, but his hands tremble slightly. He approaches Socrates, who looks at him calmly, almost curiously. "Tell me what to do," Socrates says. "Just drink it. Then walk around until your legs feel heavy. Then lie down. It will work on its own." Socrates takes the cup. No hesitation, no trembling. His hand is steady. The friends are crying now, most of them, openly weeping. They've tried to be strong, but they can't anymore. This is too much, too final, too real. Only Socrates is composed. He looks at them with something like reproach. "My friends, control yourselves. I sent the women away so we could avoid this kind of scene. I've heard that people should die in peaceful silence. Be calm."
They try, they really try, but tears still fall. Silent tears now, but tears nonetheless. Socrates raises the cup, pausing only to ask if he can pour a libation to the gods. The attendant says no. They've mixed only enough for one dose. There's none to spare. Then I'll pray anyway, Socrates says. I pray that my journey from this world to the next will be fortunate. May it be so.
And then, simply, matter-of-factly, he drinks. He drains the cup completely, not hesitating, not gagging, just drinking it down as if it were wine, as if this were any other evening, any other drink. The friends watch, horrified, awed, unable to look away. He hands back the empty cup and begins to walk. Around the small cell, back and forth. His stride is steady at first, normal. He looks almost like he's just pacing while thinking, the way he used to in the agora. But gradually, his steps slow. His legs are getting heavy, numb. He can feel the poison working its way through his body, moving upward from his feet. It's time, he says, and lies down on the cot, on his back, composed, arranged properly. The attendant checks his feet, his legs. The coldness is spreading, the numbness advancing. When it reaches your heart, he says quietly, then Socrates nods understanding. He lies there, still conscious, still himself. His friends gather close, not speaking, just present, bearing witness, being with him until the end. Socrates is covered with a cloth now, his body hidden. But suddenly he moves, pulling the cloth from his face. His eyes open. His voice, still strong, speaks final words. Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius, the god of healing. A cock, the traditional sacrifice offered in thanks for curing an illness. What does Socrates mean? Is he suggesting that death is the cure for life? That we should thank the gods for releasing us from the disease of existence? Or is it simpler than that? Just a genuine debt he wants honored, a sacrifice he promised. The friends will debate the meaning forever, but Crito understands the practical part. It shall be done, he promises. Is there anything else? Silence. They wait, hoping for more words, some final wisdom, some last teaching. But there's nothing. Socrates has spoken his last. The silence stretches. The room is completely quiet, except for the sound of breathing, of suppressed weeping. The attendant checks again, pulling back the cloth. Socrates' eyes are fixed now, staring at nothing. The coldness has reached his heart. The numbness is complete. The end has come.
The attendant gently closes Socrates' eyes, arranges the cloth properly over the body. He's gone, he says softly. And he has. The man who asked questions, who examined lives, who spent 70 years pursuing truth and virtue, who refused to compromise his principles even to save his life, is dead. The friends sit in stunned silence. Some cry openly now. Some just stare. Some cover their faces. The loss is overwhelming, incomprehensible. How can Socrates be gone? How can that voice be silenced? How can those questions end? Phaedo will remember this moment for the rest of his life. Years later, telling the story, he'll say, "Such was the end of our friend, a man who was, we would say, of all those we knew in our time, the best, the wisest, and the most just. The sun has set. The cell is growing dark. Outside, Athens continues its life, unaware or uncaring that something momentous has occurred. Markets are closing. Families are having dinner. The ordinary business of living goes on. But in this small room, something has changed. Something has ended. An era has passed. The gadfly is silent. The examined life has reached its conclusion. The friends will leave soon, carrying this memory forever. They'll go back to their lives, changed by what they've witnessed. Some will become teachers, spreading what they learned. Some will write, preserving these conversations, these ideas, these moments. Some will just remember, holding this day sacred, never forgetting the man who showed them how to live and how to die. The body will be prepared for burial. The funeral rites will be performed. The grave will be marked. All the customary things that humans do when someone dies. But the real Socrates, the soul, the essence, where is that now? Is it journeying to another place, as he believed? Is it preparing for rebirth, for another life, another chance to pursue wisdom? Is it united with eternal forms, with truth itself, finally understanding all the things he questioned about in life? Or is it simply ended, dissolved, returned to nothing? We don't know. We can't know. Death keeps its secrets. But this much is certain. Something lives on. Not just memory, though memory matters. Not just influence, though influence is real. But something more. The questions live on. The examined life lives on. The pursuit of truth lives on. The courage to stand for principle lives on. The refusal to accept easy answers lives on.
Socrates died, but what he represented, what he embodied, what he taught by living exactly as he spoke, that doesn't die. That can't die. Not as long as there are people who care about truth more than comfort, who value wisdom over wealth, who examine their lives instead of sleepwalking through them. The stars come out over Athens. The same eternal stars, indifferent to human affairs, watching over the living and the dead with equal dispassion. And somewhere beneath those stars, in houses and workshops and schools, people are thinking. Some about Socrates, some about the questions he asked, some about how to live, some about what really matters. The gadfly is gone, but the sting remains. And Athens, whether it knows it or not, will never be quite the same again.
The funeral is quiet. Just friends and family. A simple ceremony. The body is prepared according to custom, washed and wrapped, laid on a bier. They carry him to his tomb, somewhere outside the city walls, where Athenian dead are buried. The burial customs are ancient, traditional. Offerings are made, prayers are spoken. The body is placed in the earth. The grave is marked with a stone, simple, bearing his name and perhaps the name of his deme, Alopeke. Nothing elaborate, nothing grand, just what's customary for a citizen of Athens. And then it's done. The body is in the ground, the physical presence is gone. What remains? Everything. Everything remains. Plato goes home that day and begins to write.
He's been traumatized by the trial and execution. He saw Athens, his beloved city, the democracy he was raised to revere, kill the best man he ever knew. How does one process that? How does one make sense of it? He writes dialogues, conversations, recreations of Socrates talking with various people. Some are based on real conversations he witnessed. Some are elaborations, expansions, philosophical explorations using Socrates as a character. Some are pure fiction, Socrates saying things Plato thinks he might have said, or should have said, or would have said if he'd thought of it.
The early dialogues capture Socrates most authentically. The apology, reconstructing his trial defense. The credo, showing his refusal to escape. The Phaedo, dramatizing his last day. These are Plato's attempt to preserve the man he knew, to show the world what Athens destroyed. Later dialogues become more Platonic, less Socratic. Socrates becomes a mouthpiece for Plato's own philosophy, his theory of forms, his political ideas, his metaphysics. The real Socrates probably wouldn't recognize himself in some of these later works, but that's okay. Ideas evolve, understanding deepens, the student grows beyond the teacher, as perhaps the teacher would have wanted. Plato founds the Academy, a school in Athens, in the grove where they used to gather. It will last for centuries, becoming one of the most important institutions in Western intellectual history. Students come from across the Mediterranean world to study philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, all the things Plato thinks important. The Academy teaches in the Socratic tradition, even as it develops beyond Socrates. Questions matter more than answers. Dialogue matters more than lecture. Examining beliefs matters more than memorizing facts. The gadfly's spirit lives on, institutionalized, systematized, but still recognizable. Xenophon writes too, his own accounts. His Socrates is different from Plato's, more conventional, more religious, more practical, less interested in abstract forms, more interested in living well day to day. It's a valid perspective, another angle on the complex man who was Socrates. Between Plato and Xenophon, and fragments from others, we get our image of Socrates. Incomplete, sometimes contradictory, filtered through other minds, but enough. Enough to grasp who he was, what he cared about, how he lived. The other companions scatter. Antisthenes develops his philosophy of self-sufficiency, founding what becomes the Cynic school. Ascetic, radical, taking Socrates' disregard for wealth and comfort to extremes. I can see your vanity through the holes in your cloak, Socrates once told him. But Antisthenes builds a whole philosophy on those holes. Aristippus goes the other direction, founding what becomes the Cyrenaic school. Pleasure is good, they teach, but with wisdom and moderation. Socrates would probably approve the moderation, question the elevation of pleasure, but appreciate the attempt to think through ethics systematically. Euclid founds the Megarian school, focusing on logic and dialectic. Phaedo returns to Elis and establishes his own circle. Others teach in Athens or abroad, each carrying some piece of Socrates with them, each developing it in their own way.
There's no orthodox Socratic philosophy. Socrates left no writings. He established no school. He never claimed to have a system. What his followers inherit is a method, a commitment, an example. And they take it in different directions, sometimes contradictory directions.
arguing with each other about what Socrates really meant, what he really believed. But perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps that's what Socrates would have wanted. Not disciples repeating his words, not followers accepting his authority, but thinkers examining their own lives, following arguments wherever they lead, caring more about truth than about loyalty to any particular doctrine. The influence spreads. Plato teaches Aristotle. Aristotle will become arguably the most influential philosopher in history, systematizing knowledge, founding formal logic, shaping Western thought for 2 millennia. And though Aristotle disagrees with much of Plato's philosophy, though he develops his own very different system, he's still part of the Socratic lineage, still committed to rational inquiry, still examining and questioning and pursuing truth. The Cynics influenced the Stoics, who will develop a rich philosophy of virtue and acceptance that will comfort and guide millions through the centuries. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, writing his meditations on campaign, is channeling something that goes back to Socrates. The examined life, the focus on virtue, the acceptance of fate. The Cyrenaics influence the Epicureans, who will create a sophisticated philosophy of pleasure and peace. Different from Socrates, but still engaged with questions he raised. What makes life good? How should we live? What should we pursue or avoid? Christianity, when it develops, will have a complex relationship with Socratic philosophy. Some early Christian thinkers see Socrates as a precursor, a pagan who somehow glimpsed truths that Christianity reveals fully. His willingness to die for truth, his belief in the soul's immortality, his conviction that virtue matters more than life. These resonate with Christian values. Others are more suspicious. Philosophy is worldly wisdom, they say. Revelation is what matters, not reason. But even these critics are shaped by Socratic questioning, by the demand for examined belief, by the refusal to accept easy answers. The Middle Ages mostly forget Socrates. Or rather, they know him only through Plato and Aristotle. The original figure fades, becomes a character in other people's stories. But the method survives. The scholastic disputations of medieval universities, the careful definition of terms, the examination of arguments. This is Socratic dialectic adapted to Christian theology. The Renaissance rediscovers him. New translations of Plato circulate. Humanists celebrate ancient wisdom. Socrates becomes a model again, the wise man unafraid to question authority, the martyr for truth. Erasmus and More and others look back to Socrates as an example of virtue achievable through reason, of nobility available even to pagans. The Enlightenment embraces him fully. Socrates the questioner, Socrates the rational inquirer, Socrates who refuses to accept tradition uncritically. He becomes a hero to philosophers who want to examine all beliefs, religious and political, by the light of reason. The gadfly becomes a symbol of intellectual freedom, of the right to question, of the duty to think for yourself. Dare to know, Kant declares, summarizing Enlightenment values. It's pure Socrates. The examined life, the commitment to truth, the courage to think independently. Modernity has a more complicated relationship. Nietzsche attacks Socrates, blaming him for elevating reason over instinct, for making Western culture too rational, too life-denying. Socrates killed tragedy, Nietzsche says, killed the Dionysian spirit, made everything about logic and argument when life is more than that. It's a powerful critique, but even Nietzsche can't escape Socrates. He questions him, examines him, uses dialectic to attack dialectic.
The gadfly has stung even his critics. The 20th century sees Socrates everywhere. Civil rights activists citing his willingness to face unjust laws while insisting on justice. Psychoanalysts finding the examined life in their therapeutic method. Educators building Socratic seminars where questions matter more than lectures. Scientists embracing the Socratic commitment to following evidence wherever it leads. Even popular culture knows him, the absent-minded professor type, the eccentric genius who asks too many questions, the sage who seems simple but is actually profound. These are all descendants of Socrates. The archetype he embodied lives on, transformed, adapted, but recognizable. And today, right now, as you listen to this, Socrates lives still. Not literally, obviously. His body has been dust for 2.5 millennia. The Athens he knew has long since disappeared. The language he spoke is dead. The gods he honored are forgotten. But what he represented, what he embodied, what he taught not through doctrines, but through living, that lives on. Somewhere, a student is learning to question assumptions. A scientist is following evidence despite preconceptions. A person is examining their life, asking if they're living well, wondering what really matters. A thinker is refusing to accept easy answers. Someone is standing up for principle despite cost. All of them, whether they know it or not, are children of Socrates. All of them carry forward his legacy. The examined life, the pursuit of truth, the courage to question, the commitment to virtue, the belief that how we live matters more than how long we live, the insistence that knowledge begins with knowing we don't know, the conviction that the unexamined life is not worth living. These aren't just Socratic ideas, they're Socratic gifts, given to Athens, to Greece, to Western civilization, to humanity. Given through conversations in the agora, through questions that wouldn't stop, through a life lived with absolute integrity, through a death faced with perfect courage. Socrates wrote nothing, built nothing, conquered nothing. He had no wealth, no power, no worldly success. He was poor, homely, often annoying. He made enemies. He was misunderstood. He was killed for asking questions. And yet his influence is incalculable. Philosophy, science, democracy, education, psychology, ethics, all bear his mark. Every time someone questions authority, examines a belief, pursues truth, lives by principle, Socrates lives again. The gadfly died, but the sting is eternal. Athens thought it silenced him. It only made him immortal. The questions he asked are still being asked. The life he lived is still inspiring lives. The truth he pursued is still being pursued. The courage he showed is still being needed. And as long as there are people who care more about truth than comfort, more about virtue than success, more about living well than just living long, as long as there are people willing to ask uncomfortable questions, to examine unexamined beliefs, to stand alone against crowds, to face consequences for principle, Socrates is not dead. He never will be.